Chapter 1566. In the general's mansion, breakfast was ready. The air was filled with a rich aroma, and the sound of rumbling could be heard. Each and every one of them had graceful figures and beautiful appearances. Their faces were flushed red, and they felt incredibly ashamed. However, he couldn't help but stare at the vegetables, buns, and porridge on the table. It was a simple breakfast. With the power and influence of the general's mansion, it could even be said to be crude. But this taste, oh, I can't think about it. I really can't think about it. I can't even swallow my saliva. When Chinyu arrived, this was the scene in front of him. The beauty's stomach rumbled like thunder. It was simply too beautiful. This caused the group of beauties who were drooling and bowing their heads to have the urge to crawl into the cracks in the ground. The corner of little Meaty's mouth curled up, revealing a cold smile that was hard to detect. She waved her hand. All of you can leave. Listen to the noise. This was simply slapping them in the face. They felt even more ashamed. The maids covered their faces and retreated. Chinyu coughed. Just as he was about to say something, he was interrupted by a wave of his hand. Eat first. Feeling guilty, he felt that he had no confidence at all. He nodded obediently and sat down to eat. Of course, before he opened his mouth, Chinyu already knew that the breakfast on the table in front of him was cooked by the roots. Streams of heat gushed out from his body, spreading to his limbs and bones. Soon, he felt his entire body heat up and his face flush red. With a thought, he guessed that the effect of this breakfast was to make up for the loss he had suffered from the Heaven's Inquisition yesterday. Her heart warmed slightly, and then she panicked. First, the sect leader of the Night Demon sect had spoken harshly to his face. Then, the maidservant had a resentful look in her eyes. Now, little Meaty's attitude towards him had changed. Something had happened. Something had definitely happened. Chinyu panicked and his heart raced. As he looked at the little girl from the demonic sect who was calmly enjoying her breakfast, his eyes became increasingly chaotic. With a cold laugh, he slammed his chopsticks down on the table. Meaty put down the half-eaten bun in her hand and glared at him hatefully. Men at the root are all the same. I've treated you well, but you're not used to it? If you want to eat, eat. If you don't, leave now. Chinyu let out a long breath. He clenched his teeth and said, Last night, what are you thinking? Don't daydream, okay? I was afraid that you would be scared to death, and that I wouldn't be able to collect my debts, so I looked after you at night. Ro rolled her eyes. Could it be that you thought that I would take the initiative to run into your bed? Chinyu was overjoyed. Thank you. I was wrong. Please forgive me for my rudeness. His appetite was greatly stimulated. He ate 10 buns and 3 bowls of porridge in one go. He felt comfortable and warm all over. Ro had a cold expression on her face. She glanced at him from time to time. Remember this. You owe me yet again. And this morning's meal. She got up and left. Her face was gloomy and her mood was terrible. Chinyu patted his belly. His lips curved up in a smile. As long as nothing happened, everything was fine. Otherwise, he really did not know what to do in the future. Moreover, was the person in Meaty's body someone to be trifled with? If he really did touch it, humph. Even if Chinyu's body was forged from iron, he would likely be eaten up and ground into slag. However, as he thought of that strand of hair, he stopped himself. It must have fallen off when he was moving him onto the bed. That's right, that was it. Outside the courtyard, Ro walked down the corridor. Her complexion became increasingly ugly. She clenched her teeth and muttered to herself. If one listened carefully, it was nothing more than a hee-hee man, nothing new at all. A gust of wind blew past. The surface of the pond outside the corridor began to ripple. The green lotus leaves instantly turned yellow. As they were tossed about by the ripples, they disintegrated into powder. Pieces of white fish rose up from the bottom of the water, floating amongst the withered leaves. It was truly a pitiful sight. His Highness Li Ijo personally arrived outside the general's residence. For a prince to befriend a high-ranking general of the border army, no matter where one looked in the world, this was an extraordinary crime. If one wasn't careful, there was a chance they would create a great calamity. But towards General Jean, he didn't need to worry too much. In particular, after a sleepless night, he had figured out some things. Li Zhou felt that it was best to let more people know that he had an unusually close relationship with the Golden General Ning Qin. He feared that others wouldn't see enough. "Your Highness, please enter. I will immediately pass on the message." The gatekeeper respectfully bowed. Towards this noble descendant of the heavens, he could only bow and scrape. Li Zhou smiled and waved his hand. "There's no need. I will wait here. You can go pass on the message." The gatekeeper wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. He didn't dare to delay any longer. He turned and ran away. Soon, the general's residence opened. Qin Yu stepped out and cupped his hands together. "Greetings, Your Highness." Li Zhou carefully looked at him and then laughed. "Ning Qin, good job. You didn't lose any face for me." He waved his hand. "Bring up the gift. Today, I want to drink a few cups with General Jin and share my thoughts with him." Qin Yu smiled and nodded. "If Your Highness is in the mood, then I will accompany you. Please." Li Zhou was the sixth highness of the Western Wilderness. Relatively speaking, he had the deepest karmic ties with Qin Yu. When the two of them were in the broken world, they had fought many times. Unfortunately, even now, when they met again, this highness still didn't know. Of course, it was for the best that he didn't know. Otherwise, if this man in front of him turned around, he feared he would turn into a war of words. Although Qin Yu had already obtained the trust of the Western Wilderness Great Emperor, his intuition told him that Li Zhou might still be useful in the future. The first guest to arrive at the general's residence was the Western Wilderness Great Emperor, His Highness Zhou. Although he was only the sixth, he had experienced many ups and downs and still stood tall. It was said that in the imperial capital, there were some signs that this sixth highness was a late bloomer. With the previous desolate emperor holding him in high regard, he might have a chance to rise up and become a dragon. In short, in the eyes of the servants in the residence, the first guest of the residence truly had a great deal of weight. The banquet began, and all sorts of delicacies were delivered into the main hall. Of course, this time, it wasn't the root person personally cooking. Li Zhou didn't have the face to do so. Of course, this sixth highness wasn't the same today. He really came here to eat and drink. What he cared about was General Jin's attitude. Even if he only drank a cup of water, if he remained the same as before, that would be 1,000 times better. The results were mixed. General Jin still recognized the friendship between the two of them, but compared to the past, there was a bit more distance between them. It wasn't obvious, but it was still noticeable. As the saying went, the world changed with time. When the Dark Ruler first entered the Western Wilderness, he naturally couldn't compare with his current status as an important general of the border army. The change in his attitude was within his expectations, so he told the truth. Li Zhou, who got the result, was even happier now. What he was truly worried about was how to continue befriending General Jin Qin in the future. As a prince trapped in the imperial capital, there were far too few promises he could make to a general of the border army. Between people, if they weren't close, they were far apart. After the banquet ended and leaving behind a pile of gifts, Li Zhou stood up and bid his farewells. As he boarded the carriage, he held on to Qin Yu's arm and said with the help of his wine, "I hope General doesn't forget the past." As he watched the carriage leave, Qin Yu's expression was calm. He knew that the reason Li Zhou came here today was to say these words. But unfortunately, from the very start, the two of them were destined to walk different paths. Thus, there was no such thing as past. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the carriage drove away from the gathering place of the eastern city. The general's residence that was unscathed by heaven's inquisition seemed calm and tranquil. But the truth was that it had become the focus of everyone's attention in the imperial capital. Li Zhou's actions naturally affected the hearts of the people. It wasn't that no one tried to take the initiative to express their friendliness before the dust settled, but they couldn't find a suitable reason to do so. And given how highly His Majesty regarded General Jin Qin, it wasn't necessarily beneficial to privately befriend him. If it weren't for the many scruples in their hearts, the general's residence would have been filled with guests today. There wouldn't be any peace and quiet right now. Without stopping, the carriage returned to the palace. The sixth highness reeked of alcohol, and his face was flushed red. He waved his hand to indicate that he was fine and returned to his chambers alone. After dismissing the maids and attendants, Li Ijo's eyes brightened. Although he still reeked of alcohol, he didn't seem drunk at all. He took a deep breath and bowed. "Your son Li Ijo asked your majesty to descend." Space trembled and a phantom appeared. The figure behind the bead curtain that seemed impossible to see clearly spoke up. "How is it?" Li Ijo said. "Reporting to your majesty, your son paid a visit to General Jin Wu today and drank with him in the hall. I have determined that his essence energy is complete and that he hasn't suffered any damage." As he spoke, he took out something from his chest and offered it up with both hands. Looking at this object with the naked eye, it looked like a bubble-like bead. Its surface was incomparably smooth, like a mirror that could clearly reflect its surroundings. Although it didn't seem remarkable, the truth was that it was an extremely precious and wondrous object. It formed its own rules and could quietly record everything that occurred in front of it. No matter how high or low the cultivation of the target was, they wouldn't be able to detect it. "I understand." The voice behind the bead curtain sounded out once more. The bead vanished on its own, and the trembling space returned to normal. Li Ijo let out a long breath. In just a few short questions and answers, his forehead was already covered with beads of sweat. He lifted a hand to wipe his face and poured himself a cup of tea. After drinking it all, he still felt his heart palpitate. Before, when he boarded the carriage, it seemed as if he had borrowed the strength of the wine to say some heartfelt words to General Jin Wu. But these words were also said to the person who would be looking through the stainless net bead later. It was just that he didn't know what the result of this gamble would be. Li Ijo bitterly smiled. He could only hope that it wasn't the worst-case scenario. Imperial Palace. Behind the bead curtain, the great emperor carefully looked over the bead. The stainless net bead recorded everything. His fingers pressed down a little, and with a light cracking sound, the bead shattered without a trace remaining. Like wisps of smoke, it vanished from sight. He let out a breath, his eyes as calm as a lake. In a longevity temple, the great emperor of a country who wielded supreme authority had solemnly promised that he wouldn't doubt Qin in the slightest. But the facts proved that although the words of the rulers of the world were somewhat sincere, they couldn't be completely trusted. General Jin Wu Ningqin. Since his essence energy was complete today, it was impossible for him to deceive the heavens. There was no mistake about heavenly inquiry. A sharp light burst out from the depths of the great emperor's eyes. He seemed to sense something and stood up. "Does great elder have any objections?" After several breaths of time, a light sigh sounded out in the air. "Everything shall be as your majesty says." No, the great emperor had no expression. "As the son of heaven, I temporarily control the destiny and authority of the Western Wasteland. I am a saint amongst mortals, and my words are the law. Last night, I promised General Jin Wu that I would no longer doubt him. But today's actions are the same as slapping myself in the face. I have no face left." He looked up, his eyes becoming even calmer, like an endless sea. Could it be that great elder believes that I don't need any compensation for my face? The air was quiet. After several breaths of time, the aura faded away. The Western Wasteland Great Emperor sat behind the bead curtain. His white face and beard curved up in a light smile. Since he didn't say anything, that was tacit approval. "General Jin Wu Ningqin, since I broke my promise to you, I will naturally compensate you. I believe that in the future, when you learn of what happened today, you will also be satisfied." Qin Yu wasn't satisfied. The stainless net bead was indeed mysterious. It didn't emit any aura at all, almost forming its own rules that could record everything that happened in front of him. No matter how high or low one's cultivation was, it was impossible to detect. But in this world, there were no absolutes. That mysterious existence hidden within his body, hidden in space-time, was clearly not one of them. Although she hadn't seen Li Zhou, she was here. Besides the most hidden and obscure place in the Imperial Palace, she could sense everything. She coldly sneered, and with just a few words, she exposed Qin Yu's predicament of being schemed against. Thinking back to when he faced Li Zhou, he felt a bit of regret, that he didn't know he was in front of an old friend. It was really shameful. But this also caused Qin to be even more cautious. The world was vast, and there were always many mysterious and unheard of methods. Even if it was an unremarkable person, he still couldn't underestimate them. Otherwise, he might suffer a great loss. At the same time, he felt a bit more gratitude towards that mysterious existence hidden within his body. If it weren't for her taking precautions ahead of time and using breakfast to make up for the loss of essence energy, he suffered from Heaven's Inquisition last night. He feared he would have aroused the suspicions of the Imperial Palace. Although this wasn't enough to overturn Heaven's Inquisition's conclusion, Qin future actions would inevitably be more difficult, and there would inevitably be more twists and turns. This was the so-called human heart was made of flesh. How could it be made of iron or stone? Although Qin still had great misgivings towards this mysterious existence hidden in space and time who had inexplicably appeared and inexplicably had a favorable impression of him. As he walked step by step to where he was today, he couldn't help but feel a little closer and more trusting. Although he was clear-headed, he still couldn't completely control his own mood. Little Meaty rolled her eyes at him and then stood up to leave. There's no need to say words of gratitude. This sort of thing that doesn't cost me anything isn't worth anything at all. If you really want to thank me, then think about how you'll repay your debt. She clenched her teeth. She had invested time and time again, but there was no return at all. She felt depressed in her heart. But at the corners of her lips, there was a smile that even she didn't notice. Light and cheerful. Night. The Imperial Palace issued a decree and an angel arrived at the general's residence. Along with the imperial decree was a giant plaque. Although it was covered by a veil, it was still difficult to hide its sharpness and vast aura. General Ning Qin of the Golden Empire, who has conformed to the emperor's heart and performed meritorious deeds for the country, is promoted to third-class Marquis Loyal Marshal. He will also be granted the title of Secretary of the Ministry of Military Affairs and will be a general of the same rank. The imperial decree's contents were simple. Although it was only a few sentences, the contents were filled with a grand atmosphere. Imperial Zhou had ruled the Western Wastelands and learned from the lessons of the previous dynasty. They severed the title of Marquis, and that was the pinnacle of officials. Looking at the Western Wastelands, unless one had performed a massive meritorious deed for the country, only then would they have the qualifications to be granted the title of Marquis. Even someone as noble as the Yi family's old patriarch and the Yi family's Yi Boho, who controlled 2 mountains in the army, was only a first-class Marquis. Although he was 2 levels lower, Qin had only entered the Western Wastelands court for a short period of time, and the speed at which he was promoted was simply mind-boggling. After the imperial decree was read, the eunuch in the imperial palace's study put on a friendly smile. He cupped his hands together and said, "Marquis Loyal Marshal, please rise and receive the decree. I have served Imperial Zhou for many years, but this is the first time I have seen a Marquis of your age. Your future prospects are limitless. If there is a chance in the future, I ask that Marquis look after this servant." Qin received the decree. He calmly bowed. "Eunuch is too polite. Please come to my residence and have some tea." The eunuch waved his hand. "There is no rush. There is no rush. I still have matters to attend to. Marquis, since you have received the imperial decree, you should also receive the plaque." There was a look of envy in his eyes that couldn't be concealed. "This is something personally written by His Majesty. It is a transcendent glory. Who knows how many great figures in the imperial capital have bitterly begged for this for many years." Qin faced the imperial palace and bowed once more. "This subject is General Jin Wu Ning. I thank your majesty for this generous gift." No matter how he felt, this attitude was indispensable. The veil was lifted to reveal a pure black plaque with golden cloud patterns. The words written on it were, General Jin Wu. In the lower right corner, in a seemingly unremarkable place, there was a line of small golden characters. This was the residence of a great general of the same rank, a third-rank Marquis Loyal Marshal, the Ning family. An imperial decree, a Marquis of 3 ranks. The imperial capital's attention was shaken. Chapter 1567. When Heaven's Inquisition descended, the insignia General Ningqin was safe and sound. This alone was enough to prove that there was nothing wrong with his actions, since this turmoil couldn't harm him in the slightest, whether it was out of appeasement or the revenge of His Majesty in the imperial palace against the various forces in the imperial capital. The storm that was stirred up would naturally become a boost that would push Jin Wu to the next step. As the saying goes, riding the wind and soaring into the clouds, the insignia General Ningqin's promotion still left countless turtles and turtles in the deep waters of the imperial capital dumbfounded. Third-class Marquis of Loyalty. Moreover, he was a great general of the same rank, a great general with military power. Looking at the court, how many officials could suppress him? Of course, there were definitely some. For example, the two great Yi families, Prime Minister Han of the imperial court, the secretary of the military department, and the several powerful princes of the emperor clans. But thinking of this, no one felt relaxed. Instead, the bitter smiles on their faces became even deeper. This was because these people were the true big shots of the imperial court. They were the indisputable super thighs of the Western Wasteland Empire. Suddenly, they discovered that the insignia General Ningqin, who came from the broken world and had an ordinary cultivation, was now a high official. This caused those who worked hard in the court to grind their teeth and their eyes to turn red. But now, those who were still envious were the lucky ones in the court. Those ministers who had jumped out early on to criticize the Golden Generals with fierce words and petitioned the great emperor to punish them now had bitter expressions on their faces, as if they were about to drip tears. Since the insignia general was fine and had instead been promoted, becoming the Marquis of the Western Wasteland, then they were doomed. In the rear palace of the Imperial Palace, to the southeast of the pavilions, there was a fragrance hall. This was the residence of a favored noble lady. This noble lady had a natural body fragrance. It was light and strong, able to stir one's heart and help with cultivation. After being summoned to the Imperial Palace, she had been promoted 3 times in 5 years. From a small palace maid, she had become a noble lady who occupied a side palace in the Imperial Palace. There were rumors that if noble Lady Xiang was pregnant, the position of a concubine would be as easy as pie. She would truly become a character that couldn't be underestimated. After all, the most powerful type of wind in the world was pillow talk. If it was used well, once it was brought out, it would be able to decide the matter with a single strike or turn the tide. In short, it would be able to look down on everyone. However, the atmosphere in the fragrance-smelling hall today was rather gloomy. Firstly, His Majesty was busy with government affairs and hadn't been here for half a month. Secondly, the noble lady, who had always been sweet and amiable and had a gentle temperament, had recently been in a bad mood and had punished 2 palace maids who had caused trouble. Although it couldn't be considered to be severe, it was still covered in blood, causing everyone's hearts to tighten, and they became even more cautious as they walked. They were deeply afraid that if they made the slightest movement, they would suffer an unexpected calamity. Eunuch Wei. The 2 palace maids bowed respectfully. It was not only because he was the leader of the eunuchs in the smelling hall, but also because he had read the imperial edict on behalf of the emperor not long ago. Among the eunuchs, this was a great honor, not to mention that Eunuch Wei had personally summoned Ningqin. Even if they were in the harem, they could still hear a few words about this new Marquis's fame. With Eunuch Wei's kindness and ability to socialize, they had probably already established a good relationship during their journey together. With this background, coupled with Eunuch Wei's young age, it wasn't impossible for him to become one of the most powerful eunuchs in the palace in the future. Just like that eunuch who by His Majesty's side, how awe-inspiring. Thinking of this, the 2 palace maids blushed and looked at Eunuch Wei with a hint of charm in their eyes. In the imperial palace, the long night was unbearable. There were always some pitiful people who came together to comfort each other. But today, Eunuch Wei wasn't in the mood to talk to the 2 beautiful palace maids. He nodded and walked away, causing the two young palace maids to look at his back, unable to help but reveal a bit of sadness. Wei Wei greets master. After reporting, he entered the room, knelt down, and respectfully kowtowed. Noble Fragrance was leaning on the soft couch, looking at him with a complicated look in her eyes. She softly said, "Get up. I told you to deliver something to the residents. Is everything all right at home?" Wei Wei said, "Noble can rest assured that the old man and madam are doing well. He told me to pass on a message to you to serve father in peace, and that there is no need to worry about them." After a moment of hesitation, he revealed a smile. "When I returned to the residence, this servant received a reward from the old man. He said that there were several jars of wine that your highness personally made when she was young and buried underground for many years. It was only when you were bestowing the title of noble that you took them out. There is still some left, so he gave this servant a jar." Noble Fragrance's complexion changed. She frowned, and her eyes darkened. "Father is really muddle-headed. How can he give this wine that I personally brewed to a servant?" Her eyes were cold. "Wei Wei, leave the wine in the palace. You can leave. In the future, don't come to my side. Just do your work outside." The several palace maids waiting on the side all widened their eyes in shock. They thought that it was just a jar of wine. Even if it was personally brewed by a noble, they shouldn't ignore the always trusted eunuch Wei just because of such a small matter. Their hearts filled with fear and unease. The palace maids lowered their heads, feeling their hearts tremble. Wei Wei knelt on the ground. A complex light flashed in his eyes. Then, he took a deep breath and revealed a decisive look. He took out a jar of wine and placed it on the ground with both hands. He respectfully bowed to Noble Fragrance. "Your Highness, take care. This servant will leave now." The eunuchs in the imperial palace were all crippled and pitiful worms. In the past, when the little palace maid first entered the palace, she was often bullied. One day, the pitiful worm took a beating for the little palace maid, and the two became closer. Then, after some years, the little palace maid obtained His Majesty's favor and was slowly bestowed the title of noble. The pitiful worm also became a moderate character in this imperial palace. At the very least, he was no longer bullied by others and now had the qualifications to bully others. As Wei Wei walked out of the fragrant fragrance hall, he turned his head and revealed a gratified look. "Even if you have become a high and lofty noble now, you are still that timid little palace maid to me. This was good, this was enough." In the past, the pitiful worm and the little palace maid had talked about everything. Perhaps he remembered the noble's childhood experiences more clearly than the noble. There was no way he could personally brew wine. The old master's reward was likely to send him on his way. Wei Wei smiled and straightened the eunuch hat on his head. Although he was a cripple, he wouldn't harm his friends. After returning to his residence, Wei Wei sent away several pitiful worms who came to ask for information. As he watched them leave in a panic, he thought of something and smiled. Then, he closed the door. One day later, in the middle of the night, the door opened from the outside with a loud click. Two black-clothed men came in from the outside and immediately saw Wei Wei lying on the table. There was still a faint fragrance of wine in the air, but the dishes on the table had already turned cold. It was as if Wei Wei had fallen asleep on the table. "Humph, you unappreciative eunuch," one of the black-clothed men cursed. Then, he sneered. "Do you think you can help your master escape this calamity by committing suicide? In your dreams." He stepped forward and kicked Wei Wei's cold corpse to the ground. The other man frowned. "Enough. He's already dead. Why ruin his corpse and ruin your own virtue?" He looked around the room and waved his hand. "Go and put the things away. We're leaving." The first black-clothed man resentfully stopped. He took out several things from his chest and flashed into the inner room. Looking at Wei Wei's corpse, the black-clothed man revealed a trace of admiration. It was beyond his expectations that there would be eunuchs who didn't care about their own lives. After a moment of hesitation, he flicked his sleeves, and an invisible force lifted Wei Wei back onto the table. This was all he could do to restore some semblance of dignity to this eunuch. "Let's go." The two black-clothed men turned and left. The door quietly closed. The next day, news of a eunuch chief of the Fragrance Palace, Wei Wei, committing suicide to escape punishment was exposed. The imperial palace guards personally took over and found several forbidden items in his room. Although they didn't know what they were, rumors said that they were related to witchcraft. Witchcraft was real witchcraft. In this world where there were gods, this was an extremely terrifying method. It had always been a forbidden, evil secret technique in the palace. Anyone who was involved in it would be punished with extreme punishment. The Fragrance Palace was in chaos. Wails could be heard everywhere. The imperial palace guards rushed in and pulled away all the palace maids and eunuchs. They knelt neatly outside the palace. Then, swordlight flashed and heads rolled to the ground. The smell of blood assailed the nostrils. Soon, eunuchs with pale faces rushed in with buckets of water to wash the blood on the ground. Inside the palace, Noble Xiang's face was pale. She held a handkerchief in her hand. Her eyes were blank and empty. It was as if she was extremely frightened and numb. Noble Xiang, His Majesty has decreed that you should stay in the Fragrance Palace from now on. You can't take a step out without an imperial edict. One of the imperial palace guards said with a cold face. Without waiting for a response, he turned around and left. Close the entrance and seal it. Lock the connection between the inside and outside. Noble Xiang's body trembled and slowly came to her senses. Listening to the clanking sound, she closed her eyes and shed tears. You clearly know that I let you go. Why do you still want to die here? The matter of Noble Xiang and the harem involving witchcraft broke out. The palace was purged in one day. Heads were killed, and the smell of blood assailed the nostrils. Outside the imperial palace, the action had begun. Noble Xiang's father, the minister-counselor of the Ministry of Works, was directly deprived of his 5th grade official position and put into the prison of the Ministry of Justice. Days later, the cry of the minister-counselor was loud. All the young and strong men were taken into custody, and the women were temporarily locked up in a musical house to await further punishment. Those who dared to resist were killed without mercy. Soon, after only one night, the minister-counselor in the prison of the Ministry of Justice could not stand the torture and bit out several people involved in the harem witchcraft. Their official positions were not high, but they were very clever. They were almost everywhere in the imperial court. This time, everyone smelled a strange aura. Another 2 days later, a deputy general in the army was involved in this matter. Before the Ministry of Justice came, the deputy general committed suicide at home, which seemed to cut off the clue. However, only half a day later, a high-ranking official in the military, who had a high position and was given the title of Deputy Privy General, was deprived of his official position and put into prison. It seemed to be earth-shattering, but also like a stone coming to the bottom of the river. All the people in the capital had been searching for so long, and finally found the direction of the knife. This Deputy Privy General was quite influential in the military. The reason why he could be popular was that he had an extremely powerful background. The Empress Yi family. Yi Bohu had personally given him the position of Deputy Privy General, which was not a secret in the capital. Thinking of the dead head of the eunuchs in the smelling hall, not long ago, it happened to be the person who read the emperor's decree to recall General Jean. The meaning of this was profound. For a time, everyone in the capital was in a panic. Even the old bastards in the deepest part of the pond could not help but open their eyes. They thought, after Heaven's Inquisition, our emperor has finally won some time for himself. What is he doing now? Mao Hung in the military, the old, and the Empress Yi family were all the cornerstones of the empire. To waver without permission was to harm the foundation of the empire. How could the elders of the emperor clans allow such a thing to happen? But the imperial palace was silent. It was clear that they tacitly approved of what was happening in the outside world. As for the Minister of Justice, when he first entered officialdom, he married a woman surnamed Yi. She was not beautiful, but she was actually quite virtuous. Dark clouds hung low, threatening to destroy the city. Loyal Marquis Mansion. The tumultuous events in the outside world certainly couldn't involve Qinyu. But everyone knew that he was the one who started this storm. Upon hearing that the young eunuch had died, Qin Yu had a calm expression. This was because on that day outside the capital region, when he saw this person leave, Qin Yu had sensed death energy lingering around his body. It was clear that from that time onwards, Wei Wei already knew his fate. Within the capital, as the deputy privy general of the military was imprisoned, the turmoil that began with the witchcraft insect incident in the imperial palace had completely transformed into a storm that swept through the western wasteland court. Waves, private deals, forming cliques for private gain, disregarding the laws of the nation, corruption, and bribery. This was a massive attack that involved countless high officials of the court. But anyone with a discerning eye could see that those who were unlucky today were the ones who charged the front during the impeachment of General Jean. But it was impossible for His Majesty to set off such a great storm in the court just to help General Jean vent his anger. Then, if one continued to think about it, they would arrive at the root cause that even the old bastards in the deep waters found incomparably thorny. These people, whether they were in the open or in the dark, directly or indirectly, most of them had inextricably linked relationships with the later Yi family. Qin Yu was happy to see the later Yi family suffer misfortune. He didn't even mind throwing a large stone down when he had the chance. Hitting someone while they were down didn't sound good. But if you want to kill me, do you still want to be a gentleman? That would be foolish. But as he thought about it again and again, Qin Yu bitterly smiled. He couldn't help but rub his eyebrows. The later Yi family, even if they were only a dog chained up in the hands of the Western Wasteland's imperial family, this dog was far too strong. It had lived for countless years, and its roots were spread throughout the entire Western Wasteland. In the army, it had countless trusted aides that held great authority. So, even if the master wanted to kill this dog and eat its meat, this wasn't something that could be done casually. Otherwise, why would a scandal like the harem witchcraft erupt and then indirectly attack them from another angle? Simply put, the later Yi family would likely find it hard to escape this calamity. But this absolutely wasn't something that could be accomplished overnight. In order to prevent a dog from jumping over a wall and suffering a backlash, the chains around the later Yi family's neck would become tighter and tighter. The chain around the neck of the Yi family would definitely be pulled tighter and tighter, but until the very last moment, they would be given a chance to breathe. This caused Qin Yu to worry about his own safety. No one was a fool. He didn't believe that the dignified later Yi family wouldn't be able to sense the little secret between him and the old Yi family. So, as long as he killed him, he could ruin the chess game in front of him. It was a simple matter. To the later Yi family, they wouldn't hesitate to pay any price to do this. The more he thought about it, the more bitter his smile became. Qin Yu took a deep breath and left. He felt that for the next few days, he should temporarily go rest in the madam's courtyard. Later Yi family. Tiger Quarrying Hall. The imperial capital was in a precarious situation. As the target of public criticism, everyone in the hall had a heavy expression. The atmosphere was suffocating. As a direct descendant of the family, they naturally knew that their family was different from others. They also thought that someday in the future, a great calamity would descend upon them. But no one imagined that this day would come so quickly and so suddenly. With the sound of footsteps, everyone subconsciously lowered their heads and straightened their backs. Bohu stepped forwards. His expression was calm, and his face was as firm as a rock. Patriarch. Everyone bowed in unison. Bohu walked to the master's seat across from him and sat down. His eyes swept over everyone. Rise. Yes. Without any hesitation, Bohu went straight to the point. The current storm in the imperial capital is not a fluke. It is indeed aimed at us. The Tiger Quarrying Hall fell, deathly silent. Everyone gnashed their teeth. Some revealed looks of anger, and some were as still as a lake. Does the Western Wasteland's Emperor family really want to betray us? Aren't they afraid that my later Yi family will revolt and turn the world upside down? Bohu looked at the person who spoke and coldly sneered. Idiot! Our family has been chained from the start. As dogs, we must have the awareness of a dog. Rebelling against the Western Wasteland is the worst possible move, but it is still too early to speak of it. Another person said, Patriarch, the Emperor family and the old Yi family have clearly joined forces. If we do not resist, then even if we have a deep foundation, we will still be killed off bit by bit. Yi Bohu said, as long as a great tree lives for a long time, its roots will drill into the rock and spread through every corner. If we do not want to leave behind a disaster in the future, we must uproot it. This is a matter that takes time. If we are too hasty, then the result will be a landslide. He let out a deep breath and lightly said, Our Majesty does not wish to see this happen, so there is still time. Patriarch, this general request for the execution of General Jinwu Ningqin. At the entrance to the Tiger Quarrying Hall, a person stood up from the last seat on the right. His voice was calm, but it was filled with sharp, killing intent. Although he was seated at the end of the table, that didn't mean he was the weakest. This fellow came from a side branch of the later Yi family, but had managed to cultivate the true body of the Goliath. When he went crazy in the past, the strength he erupted with was astonishing. In these past years, he had stayed in the imperial capital and hadn't taken half a step out of the later Yi family's residence. No one had seen him personally fight, but no one dared to underestimate him in the least. A sharp light flashed in Yi Bo's eyes. He lifted a hand and pointed at Yi Gui. If you can see the crux of the problem, then His Majesty in the imperial palace, that old tiger of the later Yi family, will naturally have a response. I fear he is just waiting for us to take action. We must kill Qin Yu, but we cannot be the ones to do it. He paused for a moment, and then said, At the very least, we must maintain our silence in the imperial capital. Yi Gui furrowed his eyebrows. He turned and sat down. He had always been quiet and had a cold temperament. Everyone was used to his rude actions. The reason I have gathered you here today is to tell you that you cannot rely on luck in your hearts. My later Yi family has indeed reached a moment of life and death. But there is one more point. I want you to know that the roots of my later Yi family are deep and long enough. It won't be so easy to exterminate them. Leave. Do not act rashly and do what you are supposed to do. Although the storm has arrived, it won't reach Tiger Quarrying Hall for some time. His calmness was filled with confidence. Yes, we will take our leave. Everyone stood up and bowed before leaving in a single file. Yi Gui didn't move. He stayed behind. Yi Bohu glanced at him and furrowed his eyebrows. Why need you to help? I will naturally ask. Yi Gui lightly said, I have already waited for many years. He stood up and left, his back like a mountain. In the past, if it weren't for the grace of his family suppressing him, he would have committed suicide. The reason he had kept his life was to repay the later Yi family for raising him. At this time, wind and rain swayed. Chapter 1568. Some people say that prostitutes and assassins are the two oldest and strongest professions in this world, regardless of whether these words were right or wrong. At the very least, they had always existed in this world and had never truly disappeared. At most, it would be under a different name and wearing a different shell. Huichue Pavilion was the strongest assassin organization in the Great Wilderness. Not one of them. The name was ordinary and even sounded like it was from the Jianghu. It did not look grand or majestic. But in reality, Huichue Pavilion was extremely terrifying. Their motto had always been that as long as they paid a high enough price, they would be able to kill a sufficiently strong target. This strong did not only refer to strength, but also status, identity, and so on. In short, as long as they could afford it, Huichue Pavilion wouldn't dare to kill anyone. In the past, countless incidents, big and small, had proven this point. Otherwise, Huichue Pavilion would not have been able to achieve its current status. The most shocking rumor was that 3,000 years ago, the Southern Wasteland's great emperor suddenly died of an illness. It was rumored that it was the Jadeite Pavilion's doing. Regarding this matter, the Southern Wasteland naturally did not admit to it. However, it did not pursue the matter any further, as if it was beneath its dignity to use the life and death of a dignified emperor to increase its reputation. Huichue Restaurant neither admitted nor denied it. The seemingly normal attitude of both parties caused quite a number of people to be secretly fearful. Previously, It was said that the relationship between assassins and prostitutes was a matter of occupation. However, no one would have thought that in a wide alley in the southwest of the Western Baron imperial capital, there was a brothel with red lanterns hanging high in the sky and countless guests. It was one of the facades of Hui Chui restaurant. After a long while, when the panting gradually calmed down, the guest who had been tormented in the middle of the night turned over and got up. Drenched in sweat, the woman's face was flushed red. Her eyes were tender and charming as she propped up her sore body and helped the guest dress up. The guest who had been intimate with her on the bed a moment ago had an indifferent expression on his face as he pushed open the door and left. The woman wiped the sweat from her forehead and turned around to sit on the bed. She gently stroked her palm and caught a green jade cicada. The carving was exquisite and lifelike, as if it would flap its wings and fly in the next moment. The woman got up and walked behind the screen at the end of the bed. She sat on the toilet and peed. Then, she casually threw the jade cicada into the copper pipe used for ventilation. The tinkling sounds that followed were drowned out by the sound of pearls falling on jade plates and quickly disappeared. Old Ye's family. On the night of Heaven's Questions, the old clan head, who had shown off his brilliance, returned to his old, doddering appearance. However, in the depths of his eyes, there would occasionally be a glimmer of light that caused one's heart to tremble. Yi Bohu is the one with the most potential, strategy, and wisdom among the later generations of the Yi family. This old man also has many unfathomable things about him. Therefore, even though the imperial capital is in a precarious situation, it will remain stable for a short period of time. Picking up the kettle and watering the flowers and plants, the old patriarch's expression was calm. Send out 10 of our iron guards to guard General Jean. The general behind him bowed, turned around, and strode away. The strength of the old Yi family's iron guards might not be at the peak, but when the 10 of them joined forces, they could even fight a peak sovereign realm expert. Even if they couldn't kill him, they definitely wouldn't be able to stop him for a while. In the imperial capital, as long as they hindered him a little, no one would be able to touch General Jean Wu. The old patriarch's arrangements were just right. The imperial palace. Behind the bead curtain, the great emperor was handling government affairs. He had always been diligent, never slacking off for a day since ascending to the throne. The sky-bearing monarch bowed. Your Majesty, the Yi family has sent out 10 iron guards. They are already outside the Zhongwu Manor. The corner of the great emperor's mouth curved into a smile. He stopped writing and muttered, Yi Bohu will assess the situation and not cause a big commotion. However, with his murderous nature, he will definitely make a move. Success or failure isn't important. What's important is that the Yi family wants to use this matter to send some messages to the outside world. For example, although it's good to kill a dog and eat its meat, a little carelessness can lead to big problems. The great emperor leaned back, his smile growing. Simply put, it's to give me a warning. The sky-bearing monarch thought for a moment. Your Majesty is wise. It's such a simple matter. Sky-bearing monarch, your flattery isn't very sincere. The great emperor laughed a few times. Go to the secluded pavilion and pass on my edict. Choose Ding and Wu and appoint them to General Jean Wu. They will be by his side in the future. Yi Bo's action was indeed a warning, but it was necessary to be cautious to avoid trouble. Wearing thick robes and having 4 claws under his abdomen was the origin of the 4th claw. As the lowliest eunuch in the imperial palace, it was amazing that he wasn't purged after the change of dynasties and instead wore the robes of an official. Therefore, according to the martial monarchs, the seemingly ordinary 4th claw was actually an impressive figure. They cultivated an extremely secretive technique of the imperial palace called the heavenly silkworm scripture. Their incomplete bodies were actually the most suitable for cultivating. Of course, not all eunuchs in the imperial palace had this qualification. For example, Wei Wei, who tried to kill himself but still couldn't save his master, was far from being qualified to receive this inheritance. The sky-bearing monarch personally came to visit. Behind him, the 2 stooped 4th claw had their heads lowered as if they would fall asleep at any moment. Greetings, sky-bearing monarch. Qin Yu cupped his hands together and bowed. Beside him, true Saint Baitu was even more respectful. Zhou Chengtian smiled. Marquis Zhongwu, I came here today on His Majesty's orders to send the 2/4 Claw here. Greetings, Marquis. The 2/4 Claws opened their eyes aslit and cupped their hands casually with an attitude that could not be considered respectful. Qin Yu frowned. Sky-bearing monarch, this is... Zhou Chengtian said. There have been many storms in the imperial capital recently, and His Majesty is worried about Marquis Zhongwu's safety. The 2/4 Claw are trusted aides of the imperial palace and can be trusted. Marquis Zhongwu can order them around without worry. Subordinate Ning Qin, thanks Your Majesty. Qin Yu bowed towards the direction of the imperial palace. He stood up, a smile on his face. I am indebted to Marquis's care in the past. How about staying here as a guest? Zhou Chengtian smiled. It's not that I don't want to, it's that I can't. I still have some matters to attend to, so I can't leave. I will definitely bother you next time. The sky-bearing monarch, who was deeply trusted by the Western Wasteland Great Emperor, bid his farewells and left. After Qin Yu bid his farewells, he looked at the 2/4 Claw behind him, a thoughtful expression on his face. As if sensing his awkwardness, one of them opened his eyes and chuckled. Marquis, there is no need to bother with us. We two old fellows only need to arrange a place for us to stay. We'll take care of everything else. Qin Yu smiled and nodded. Good. Bai Su, you personally lead the 2/4 Claw to a place to settle them down. Make sure everything is appropriate. Bai Su nodded. He respectfully reached out a hand. Two old sirs, please follow me. Humph. There was a cold sneer behind him. Qin Yu turned and saw little Meaty. He wasn't surprised by her elusive movements. I've stayed here long enough. When do I leave? Qin Yu thought for a moment. In several days, there will be a great court meeting. After I ascend the throne, I will likely be allowed to return to the border army. In a place like the imperial capital, little Meaty wasn't used to it. Her hands and feet were bound everywhere. In truth, Qin Yu didn't like it either. Staying here, although it seemed like he had infinite glory, the truth was that he was a chess piece. His life and death weren't in his control. Little Meaty looked at him. Be careful. Don't fail to fish and end up digging yourself in. Qin Yu smiled. Don't worry. A brothel was a brothel. Even if it had a nicer name, it couldn't change the nature of this business. It was as if there were some people who, even though they were in the dark, could still clearly feel the terrifying aura being emitted from them. Like a blazing sun in the skies, illuminating the world. It was so dazzling that one couldn't look straight at it. General Golden Ning Qin, he said in a soft voice. His tone was calm, but there was a bit of solemnity and dignity in it. Mister, this is a transaction and the price is very high. According to your rules, the other party has already agreed to our request. After a brief silence, the man with the terrifying aura and blazing sun in the skies nodded. Very well, I will accept this business. He turned and walked away. The darkness parted like a tide, not daring to touch him at all. After several breaths of time, the scene in front of him suddenly brightened. The one who had appeared in the corner was a handsome, middle-aged man with a calm demeanor. He wore blue clothes, and his sleeves were like a bright moon in the clear sky. Anyone who saw him would have a favorable impression of him. Cough, cough. A light cough came from behind the screen. The middle-aged man frowned, worry in his eyes. He took a few steps forward and turned around the screen. His eyes met with the skinny woman on the bed. She smiled and covered her nose and mouth with a quilt. Her face was flushed red, but her eyes were still filled with warmth and gentleness. The middle-aged man walked to the bedside and pulled down the quilt. He reached out a hand and stroked her face. If you want to cough, then cough. It's not good to hold it in. The woman shook her head. I'm fine. As soon as she finished speaking, there was a burst of violent coughing. Her skinny chest violently shook up and down, and specks of scarlet blood splashed out. A trace of panic flashed in her eyes. She covered her mouth. I'm fine, I'm really fine. Blood flowed out from between her fingers. The middle-aged man had a pained expression. The woman lying on the sickbed weeping blood was once a fairy maiden that countless people yearned for in the past. If it weren't for him, how could she have fallen to such a state? Thus, the middle-aged man had already made a great vow that he would make her whole in this life. But this matter was difficult, far too difficult. Luckily, the heavens didn't disappoint those who persevered. After suffering with her for so long, they finally saw a glimmer of hope for survival. Without caring about the bloodstains, the middle-aged man bent down and held the woman in his arms, carefully holding her like a cicada. "Inger, don't worry. I have already found a way to save you. Once I complete a task, I'll be able to obtain it." As he spoke to her, the middle-aged man smiled. "Once you recover, we will leave this land of trouble. We will find a place with verdant hills and clear waters, establish a cave dwelling, and live in seclusion, becoming a pair of immortal companions." The woman in his arms finally stopped coughing, but she still tightly covered her mouth, not willing to let blood flow out from her nose and mouth. Hearing this, her eyes brightened, revealing a look of longing and longing. But soon she realized something. She stared at the middle-aged man. They had been like one body for many years, and their thoughts were already connected. The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment and slowly said, "Inger, I don't want to hide this from you. There are some risks, but you should know my cultivation. As long as I am careful, there won't be any problems." Seeing the woman still staring at him, the middle-aged man smiled. "Good. I promise you that I will come back alive to see you." The woman revealed a smile. The day before the Grand Court Conference, a master and a servant arrived outside the Zhongwu mansion. Although there was a light veil covering them, the faint outline and slim figure were enough to show the beauty of the master and the servant. So, when the servant came forward and bowed, saying that an old friend was here to see the Marquis, the gatekeeper felt awkward. Now, everyone knows that the Marquis has brought his wife with him. Although she looks young and cute, she is actually very scheming. The servant girls in the mansion who originally had some thoughts about the Marquis had long extinguished those thoughts. If they sent a letter, they would be hated by his wife. But if they didn't, hiss, as the saying goes, the flowers at home are not as fragrant as the wildflowers. Who knows if they would bring even greater trouble to themselves in the future. Just as the gatekeeper's head was like a drum and he was in a dilemma, a servant girl pushed open the door and came out. She looked at the master and servant pair in front of her and said, "Madam invites the two of you in." The gatekeeper let out a long breath and hurriedly retreated to the side. He wished he could be a coward and pretend that he didn't see any of this. The master and servant pair were Yun Qing and Dai Er. In truth, the reason they appeared here today was because of some twists and turns. When Qin Yu left the imperial capital and went to the Western Border Army, the two of them had been escorted by Li Zhou's people to give Qin Yu a pleasant surprise. But they never imagined that there would be some accidents on the way. By the time the delay was over, there would be news that Ning Qin was stationed in the mine. The escort team immediately stopped. No one was willing to approach that man-eating mine. As they sent messages to the imperial capital, they stayed where they were, waiting for further orders. Following, there was news that General Jinwu had died underground. Although the team hadn't received orders from His Highness, since General Jinwu had died, they naturally didn't need to send beauties to a dead man. Just as they returned to the imperial capital, there was news that General Jinwu had performed a meritorious service in suppressing the mine rebellion and had been made a third-class Zhongwu Earl. This time, Li Zhou was left dumbfounded. After ruthlessly punishing the subordinate responsible for escorting them, he temporarily placed Yun Qing and Dai Er in a courtyard in the imperial capital. He originally thought that once the storm calmed down, he would think of a way to send them to the border army. But afterwards, a series of changes occurred. General Jinwu Ning was first impeached like a tide. Then, he soared into the highest heavens and became the current Marquis Zhongwu. This was Li Zhou's first visit, because he had another mission, and because he was worried that Qin Yu would feel as if he was asking for repayment. He didn't mention this matter. He only thought that after a period of time, before Qin Yu left the imperial capital, he would have people send Yun Qing and Dai Er back. But who would have thought that before one wave had subsided, another would rise. The imperial capital would be shaken, and the Yi family in the rear of the army would become the target of public criticism. There were many people with discerning eyes, and they could see that Qin Yu's position was critical. Li Zhou had personally witnessed how Qin Yu had killed Yun Qing and Dai. If he kept them in his hands, they would become a hot potato. If they were used by someone with ulterior motives, he would be in trouble. Without thinking too much, Li Zhou sent people to escort Yun Qing and Dai outside the Zhongwu Marquis mansion. As for how General Jinwu would arrange things and whether or not the rear residence would be safe, that would depend on himself. Seeing Yun Qing and Dai brought into the Marquis mansion by a maid, the carriage driver who had been hiding in the shadows hurriedly left to report. Back residence of the Marquis mansion. Little Meaty rubbed her chin, her eyes filled with uncertainty. To her, this was a rare situation. She took several steps back and forth, a fidgety look on her face. She wanted to turn around and leave, but she also wanted to see Qin Yu one last time. As Little Meaty was hesitating, a maid reported from outside the exquisite reception hall, "Madam, the guests have arrived." Little Meaty took a deep breath. "Go. Arrange them in the side courtyard and have people serve them well." She clenched her teeth. "Send someone to the front courtyard and have the Marquis make his own arrangements." Along the way, the maid who had been sneering to herself was suddenly left dumbfounded. She bowed in a daze and then turned to leave. As she looked at the master and servant from the corner of her eyes, she couldn't help but feel a bit more awe. In the reception hall, Little Meaty covered her face with her hands. After lowering them, she clenched her teeth and finally sighed. Whatever, since they didn't want to see them, then so be it. Chapter 1569. When Qin Yu learned of this news, he was playing with the third-class Marquis Loyal Marshal seal that the military had sent over. The Marquis seal was black and gold, the two colors wove together. Although it seemed chaotic, the truth was that it exuded a majestic aura. Old friends? Two women? Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows. He put away the seal and walked towards the rear courtyard. Along the way, after asking a few questions, he was able to roughly guess who the two people the maid was talking about were. He entered the rear courtyard and stepped into the courtyard. As everyone bowed, the figures of Yun Qing and Xiao Dai appeared in front of him. It really was them. Strictly speaking, it hadn't been too long since they parted. But the disparity in status between now and the past was even more astonishing. Seeing Qin Yu stride towards them in his Marquis robes, Yun Qing and Xiao Dai cautiously bowed from afar. "Greetings, Lord Marquis." Sixth Highness Li Zhou and that madam he hadn't seen just now might have thought that they were old friends of General Jinwu. But in truth, the two of them knew that in General Jinwu's heart, they didn't have too important a status. At most, they would be used, but Li Zhou had ordered people to bring them to the loyal Marshal Marquis mansion. With the carriage driver watching from afar, they could only brace themselves and call out. Qin Yu's eyes flashed. "Rise." His eyes swept over the two. Then, he looked at the maid with a respectful expression. Did the madam invite them in and arrange for them to stay here? "Yes," the maid said in a soft voice. Subconsciously, her eyes began to shine. But as she thought of something, her body stiffened and she lowered her head. Qin Yu nodded. His eyes fell onto the face that was exactly the same as in his memories. A dazed feeling rose in his heart, but it quickly vanished. He lightly said, "Since you've come, you may stay in the mansion. I have other matters to attend to, so I will be leaving first." Yundai let out a breath of relief, but at the same time, she also felt a bit disappointed. After leaving the master and maid's dwelling, Qin Yu took a deep breath. Without stopping, he rushed straight towards the main courtyard. As the madam that everyone knew, Little Meaty lived here. News of a pair of beautiful maidens being led into the mansion by the madam had already spread out. Seeing the Lord Marquis's hasty and dignified expression, the maids and attendants quickly bowed. Qin Yu looked at Little Meaty. He waved his hand and said, "Leave. Without my order, no one is allowed to enter." "Yes." Everyone bowed and left in a hurry. Qin Yu took 2 steps forwards. He stared at those fleshy eyes and said in a low voice, "I want to ask you something. I ask you to answer me truthfully." He paused for a moment. "There are two people outside the door. Why did you let them in?" Meaty blinked her eyes. "They said that they were your old friends. I saw that they were somewhat entangled with you, so I agreed. After all, you are now a thorn in the side of others. Who knows what methods they will use to kill you? Call them over. I've seen that they're fine, so I can rest assured." It sounded plausible, but Sheen, you didn't believe it at all. "Stop making things up. Let's be frank here. You don't have the personality to meddle in other people's business, so why did you let them in?" Little Meaty rolled her eyes. "Believe it or not, it's up to you." He stood up and prepared to leave. Sheen, you didn't stop her. He only said, "Since you don't want to talk, I'll have Yin Sheen come over and confront you face to face." "You dare?" Little Meaty panicked. Her face was full of anger. "Chinyu, don't be so ungrateful. I'll let those two women in for your own good." Chinyu nodded. "Then I thank you." He turned and walked away. Thud, thud, thud. After several steps, Little Meaty grabbed onto his arm, her eyes ruthlessly glaring at him. If it were anything else, she would have just joked about it, and Chinyu would have just muddled along and not pursued the matter any further. But not this time. Chinyu lowered his head and met Little Meaty's gaze. His eyes were calm and filled with a firm will. It was clear that he wouldn't give up until he achieved his goal. Little Meaty humphed. She was the first to look away and let go. Chinyu didn't continue walking away. He knew that Little Meaty had already admitted defeat. "You have no conscience, you ingrate." Little Meaty angrily cursed. She clenched her teeth. "That's right. That little woman called Yun Qing does have some problems. But don't ask me about the specifics, because I won't tell you." A sharp light burst out from deep within Chinyu's eyes. He took a deep breath and pressed forwards. Little Meaty was she. "Stop!" Little Meaty screamed, her face full of anger. "I told you not to ask. If you continue like this, I will leave." Chinyu furrowed his eyebrows. His intuition told him that Little Meaty wasn't lying. When Yun Qing was mentioned, she indeed felt uncomfortable. There was even a bit of restlessness. Like natural enemies repelling each other? That's right. There was a bit of a similar feeling. Little Meaty dreaded this. She didn't want to meet Yin Qing at all. At this moment, Qin Yu's heart was filled with excitement. He revealed an incomparably brilliant smile. He originally thought that she had truly vanished from this world, not leaving a single trace behind. But reality proved that this wasn't the case. Liao Shi had indeed vanished, but she had still left behind a trace in this world. Although Yin Qing hadn't recognized him, and her cultivation was so weak that it was almost negligible, she was still her. Otherwise, how could she have caused a solemn and mysterious existence hidden in space-time to feel such dread? Little Meaty's complexion was ugly. She felt as if she had picked up a stone and smashed it on her own foot. She regretted interfering and allowing that master and servant pair to enter. But if she could do it all over again, there was a high chance she would do the same thing, even if she already knew what the result would be. This discovery caused Little Meaty's mood to worsen. She clenched her teeth and roared, "I didn't say anything, but if you dare to bring her here, I will leave immediately." Chinyu smiled. "Don't worry. I guarantee that Yin Qing won't appear in front of you." As for why, he didn't have the mood to think about it. He wanted to see Yin Qing. He wanted to see the woman who had silently done everything for him in the past, and who had ultimately disappeared. Chinyu turned and left, impatient to do so. Thus, Little Meaty's complexion became even uglier than before. Her complexion darkened like thick, cumulus clouds, dripping with moisture. Marquis Zhongwu left and returned. In the courtyard, it wasn't just the master and servant pair that were confused, but the maids and attendants also had strange expressions. Chinyu took a deep breath and walked in front of Yin Qing. As he looked at the nervous expression on her face, he suddenly discovered that even though he had countless words in his heart, there was nothing he could say. This was because even though the current Yin Qing was the Liao Shi of the past, she didn't know him. Chinyu let out a deep breath and tried to make his expression as gentle as possible. "Yin Qing, in the imperial capital, did anyone bully you?" Yin Qing's eyes widened. She looked at the Qingyu in front of her with shock. She clearly didn't understand why his attitude had changed so drastically after returning for such a short period of time. From the previous calm and indifference to the current caring. That's right, this was the feeling that Qingyu gave Yin Qing. It was as if as long as she opened her mouth and casually mentioned a person's name, no matter who that person was, they would immediately suffer great misfortune. But with her cautious and careful personality, Yin Qing didn't dare to believe her own feelings. Instead, she became increasingly restless. She paled and shook her head. No. Qingyu took a step back, a smile on his face. Did I scare you? Yes, that should be the case. Don't be afraid and don't be angry. I made a mistake before and didn't recognize you. In truth, perhaps it isn't appropriate to tell you this right now. In short, I owe you a great, great favor from a long, long time ago. You might not be able to understand these words, so you don't need to understand them for now. In short, you just need to remember that I will protect you and help you. I won't allow anyone to harm you, not even the tiniest bit. He was smiling, and his smile became increasingly brilliant. But his tone was incomparably sincere, and every word came from his heart. Teacher Liao, I once thought that I would never be able to see you again in this life. Now that I have finally found you, I will definitely repay you tenfold, a hundredfold. Yun Qing looked at the Qingyu in front of her that had suddenly become a stranger. Deep in her heart, she felt a sense of closeness and trust towards him. She still felt that this was absurd. She couldn't understand why this Marquis Zhongwu, a great figure of the Western Wasteland Empire, would suddenly have such a drastic change in attitude. But this didn't affect Yun Qing's feeling of sincerity and also the excitement in her heart. Her heart began to race. She thought for a moment and lowered her head. Little Butterfly glanced at Marquis Zhongwu, who was staring at her miss. She clenched her teeth and suddenly fell to her knees. Marquis, if you really want to protect my miss, then please help her. On the road to the border army camp, she nearly died. Little Butterfly, Yin Qing shouted. She suddenly panicked. You, Marquis, there is no need to listen to her nonsense. What happened in the past is already in the past. I'm perfectly fine. Qingyu frowned for a moment before relaxing. He nodded. It's good that you're fine. He knew that haste made waste. His eyes swept over the maids and attendants around him. Miss Yin Qing, serve her well. If anything happens to her, I will not forgive you. His tone was cold and callous. When he looked at Yin Qing, it was like a warm sun. He cupped his hands together and bid his farewells. After leaving the small courtyard, Qinyu's complexion darkened. Cold waves surged in his eyes. Yin Qing had nearly died. At that time, he didn't know that she was Teacher Liao. Although she was fine now, just thinking about how he would never be able to see her again left him flustered and filled with endless anger. Someone come. Wang Datu quietly appeared behind him. General, please give me your orders. Qingyu lightly said, Go to Li Yi's palace and tell him that I know why Yun Qing nearly died without missing a single word. Tell him exactly what you said. Wang Datu respectfully bowed. Yes. He turned and walked away, his heart filled with emotion. My general is truly amazing now. He can even speak to a highness of the Western wilderness with such an attitude and tone. He is honored, absolutely honored. Then, he discovered that he was completely ignorant of the imperial capital. He simply didn't know where the 6th Highness Palace was. Cough. Wang Data coughed and waved his hand. Shwa, shwa. Several strong figures of the border army appeared in the surroundings. Although they had followed the general's orders and were resting in the side courtyard, it was impossible for them to just lie down and wait for death. Without a trace, they had already taken over the guard and patrol duties of the mansion. Wang Data nodded with satisfaction. He thought that they were truly worthy of being under his command. They were truly excellent. When he saw his nephew Wang San, his mood became even better. He pointed a finger. Wang San, that's right, I'm calling you. Immediately go to 6th Highness Li Yi's palace and pass on a message for the general. He straightened his back and subconsciously crossed his hands behind his back, repeating Qin Yu's words. Wang San shrunk his neck back, a nervous expression on his face. Uncle, cough, this isn't a military camp. Who doesn't know of our relationship? I'm just calling you. Uncle, I am the only child of my generation in our Wang family. In the future, I will have to take care of you until you die. So please don't harm me. He had a sad face. He really was about to cry. He was kicked by Big Head Wang, who scolded him for being a good-for-nothing. Our general is one of the best in the capital right now. He gave him a thumbs up and shouted, If I tell you to go, then go. What's with all the nonsense? Hurry up. If you mess up the general's matters, I will skin you alive. His nephew was naturally going to be the scapegoat. Humming a little song, Wang Dada left in a good mood. The border soldiers who weren't assigned anything felt sympathy for Wang San and vanished once more. Yin Qing had the others leave. She frowned as she looked at Xiao Dai. She wanted to say several harsh words, but as she thought about how master and servant depended on each other, she couldn't bring herself to say them. Xiao Dai fell to her knees. Miss, I know I was wrong. I shouldn't have spoken so carelessly. Yin Qing bitterly smiled. In truth, you already know. Since that's the case, why did you speak so much? Look at our current situation. It's already difficult for us to survive, so how could we dare to provoke trouble on our own initiative? As she spoke, the bitter smile on her face deepened. Moreover, those people didn't even place Li Yijo in their eyes back then. Although Marquis Zhongwu is an influential figure in the imperial capital, if we were to provoke a powerful enemy because of us, I'm afraid he would turn around and vent his anger on us. At that time, how will we, master and servant, bear the consequences? Xiao Dai clenched her teeth. Just now, when I looked at Marquis Zhongwu's attitude, it didn't seem fake. Yin Qing looked at her, not speaking. Xiao Dai knelt on the ground. Miss, I admit that I wanted to use this matter to determine his true attitude. If Marquis Zhongwu really treats you as he says, then if you suffer such grievances, he will definitely stand up for you. On the other hand, if he takes his anger out on us, then that means he was lying. I believe it's better to know sooner rather than later. Yin Qing sighed. Xiao Dai had grown up together with her. Although they were master and servant in name, she had always viewed her as her little sister. They had lived together for so many years, so how could she not guess her true thoughts? Although her words weren't wrong, they were still too rash. Did she really think that after experiencing so many things, she was still the same girl that had a glimmer of hope in her heart in Guanhai City? But now that things had come to this, there was no point in saying anything more. Yin Qing reached out and pulled her up. Now, we can only resign ourselves to fate. Looking at the Mrs. face, Xiao Dai suddenly felt some regret. She was indeed a bit willful and rash. But who told what Marquis Zhongwu said to be true? Even she couldn't help but believe him a bit. A peasant soldier from the border army arrived outside the temporary palace and asked to see Li Yi. The guards outside the temporary palace were stunned for 2 seconds before they reacted. This bastard actually said His Highness's name. If it wasn't for Wang San's quick reaction and taking the initiative to reveal his identity, saying that he was from the Marquis Zhongwu's residence, it would probably be a bloody case in the blink of an eye. But even so, he was still shrouded by the cold gazes from the other side. He waited for the reply from inside the temporary palace. If His Highness did not respond or sneered, they could guarantee that this peasant soldier in front of them would immediately be chopped into pieces. Unfortunately, the ferocity in their eyes could not be displayed in the end. His Highness invites you in. Sage Zhou Yin looked at the border soldier in front of him. His cultivation level was average, and his appearance was average. Although he was so scared that his face was slightly pale, he still gave people a feeling that he was in a daze. He thought to himself, what could happen if Marquis Zhongwu sent such a hothead? Walking in the magnificent and fairyland-like temporary palace of the prince, Wang San swallowed his saliva and then came back to his senses. Just now, he had actually called out the name of a prince in front of everyone. At first, he was afraid and broke out in a cold sweat. Then, he came to his senses. Not only was he fine, he was even invited to the temporary palace. My general is simply too awesome. I, Wang San, am honored. Ahem. From this angle, the uncle and nephew of the Wang family were indeed two branches of the same bloodline. Birds of a feather flocked together. Chapter 1570. Huangzhou's surname was Zhou, but he was called Li Yizhou, Sixth Highness. As he looked down at the stunned border army soldier Wang San, he frowned and revealed a bitter smile. Marquis Zhongwu's words were filled with dissatisfaction and dissatisfaction. He really couldn't understand why a pair of brothel girls who met by chance, even if they had a moment of happiness, would care so much. Could it be that Jinwu General Ningqin was truly an infatuated seed? But if this was true, then how would that madam in the manor be explained? He couldn't figure out, but he still had a headache. The reason was because Marquis Zhongwu wanted to be on good terms with him. This was likely related to the future inheritance of the throne. But the Li family were even more difficult to provoke. Although he was Huangzhou Highness, he was still restrained in front of them. Wang San didn't know that the Sixth Highness in front of him was currently in a state of melancholy. Thinking about his Marquis's domineering aura, he unconsciously felt more confident. He cupped his hands together and said, "Your Highness, the Marquis is waiting for my reply. Please hurry up." Li Yizhou was so angry that he almost laughed. He thought to himself, "I don't want to offend the Marquis of Zhongwu, but you're just a peasant from the border army. Even if I killed you on the spot, would there still be people who would jump out and cry injustice?" But killing intent only flashed for a moment before it was suppressed. He was just a little border army soldier. What meaning was there in killing him? It would only cause trouble. Taking a deep breath, Li Yizhou said, "I don't know the details of this matter. You can wait outside the hall. After I ask, I will give you an answer." Wang San was a bit dissatisfied, but his courage wasn't greater than the heavens. He cupped his hands together and said, "I will wait outside the hall." His words were still hurrying him. Saint Zhou Yin rubbed his temples. He looked at his highness, thinking that it wasn't easy for this border army soldier called Wang San to still be alive. Li Yizhou stood up and left. This involved Marquis Zhongwu and the Li family, so he didn't dare to make a decision alone. Asking was just an excuse. As for the specifics, he had to ask for instructions first. As for Wang San, he was just an idiot. He wasn't in the mood to waste time with him. He turned and entered the hall. Li Yizhou cupped his hands together and said, "Son Li Yizhou asks your majesty to descend." This time, the wait was slightly longer. The air fluctuated, and the blurry figure of the great emperor, who was rarely behind the bead curtain, appeared. "What is it?" His tone was indifferent and lofty. Li Yizhou was extremely respectful as he recounted everything that had happened just now. He didn't conceal anything in the slightest, nor did he mix in the slightest bit of his own attitude. "This matter is of great importance. I dare not act on my own. Thus, I took the liberty to disturb your majesty. I hope your majesty will forgive me." In the trembling space, the great emperor's shadow was silent for a moment. Then he slowly said, "You have considered this matter thoroughly." He paused for a moment. "From now on, you don't need to interfere. I will deal with it myself." The phantom disappeared, and the space returned to calmness. Li Yizhou stood up and pursed his lips, revealing a bitter smile. Just one sentence of thorough consideration, and that was it? If it were the other brothers and sisters who were favored by His Majesty, they would probably receive some rewards. After all, this matter could be said to be extremely small, but if one were to consider it as a big matter, and if it were to be grasped by someone with ulterior motives, it might set off a great storm. "Your Majesty, they are all your own flesh and blood. Why are you so biased?" Li Yizhou took a deep breath and restrained his emotions. By the time he returned to the front hall, his expression had already calmed down. He called Wang San over and said indifferently, "I have already told Marquis Zhongwu about this matter. You can go back." Wang San rubbed his head, a little suspecting that he had been fooled. "Get out of my way." Li Yizhou's face was filled with anger. The hot-headed young man finally reacted. No matter how powerful the Marquis was, he was not the one who was powerful. Zhongwu Marquis Mansion. In a side courtyard, two old fourth claws were sitting cross-legged. Their heads were drooped down, not the least bit of essence, energy, and soul leaking from their bodies. They were like two pieces of dry wood that had been buried up to their necks. But at this time, the two old fourth claws opened their eyes, a sharp light flashing in them. Glancing at each other, the two old fourth claws simultaneously raised their hands and punched out. Dong! With a deep and dull sound, layers upon layers of fluctuations instantly spread out, covering the entire Zhongwu Marquis mansion. In the back hall, little Ro frowned, a cold intent in her eyes. If this were before or in another place, if these two old sugar canes dared to bare their fangs in front of her, they would have already been captured and eaten. She lifted a hand, and waves appeared in the air, wrapping around her like a bubble. As for the other courtyard, there was no need to pay attention to the master and servant that she didn't want to see. After all, she was currently an ordinary person, let alone the two old fourth claws. Even the Western Wasteland Great Emperor couldn't see through her depths. Qin Yu frowned. He naturally sensed the actions of the two old fourth claws. Then, the space in front of him began to shake. Feeling the aura transmitted out, Qin Yu stood up and bowed. Subject Ning Qin greets your majesty. Behind the bead curtain, the Western Wasteland Great Emperor's figure appeared. He waved his hand and said, "No need for formalities." "Thank you, your majesty." Qin Yu stood up, his eyebrows furrowed together, a dignified expression on his face. "It's just a private matter. I didn't think I would disturb your majesty. It seems this matter is quite thorny." There was naturally a reason for the Western Wasteland Great Emperor's sudden arrival. Qin Yu thought for a moment and grasped the crux of the matter. "Marquis Zhongwu, I can tell you that the one you're looking for is the Li family." After a brief pause, the Great Emperor's voice continued to ring out, a faint self-deprecating light in his calm voice. "In my imperial Zhou, the bloodline of the Emperor clans actually uses the Li character in front of their surname. Although this is a teaching set down by our ancestors, I am still very dissatisfied with this." Although he didn't explicitly say it, these simple words revealed far too much inside information. Qin Yu frowned. Then he slowly relaxed. He cupped his hands together and bowed. "Your Majesty, is the so-called Li family really untouchable?" The Great Emperor said, "They have a deep background and vast fortunes. Before the time is right, do not act rashly, otherwise you will only be harmed." He looked at Qin Yu, his eyes deep. "I can make you a promise. If everything goes smoothly, I will naturally give you an explanation for this matter in the future." Qin Yu bowed. "Thank you, your majesty. I cannot stay any longer. I will be leaving." Space returned to tranquility, and the Great Emperor's projection vanished. Qin Yu straightened himself. His eyebrows furrowed together, a gloomy look in his eyes. Imperial Zhou's Li family, before the nation's surname, to be able to cause the Western Wasteland Great Emperor to feel dread, to the point where he could only patiently endure his dissatisfaction, it truly wasn't someone to be trifled with. He shook his head, a bitter smile on his face. He had left behind harsh words in front of Yin Qing, and now he had lost face for his own family. This inevitably caused Qin Yu to feel a bit awkward. But soon, he took a deep breath and suppressed all these emotions deep in his heart. Thinking for a moment, he pushed open the door and arrived at the courtyard where Yin Qing and her servant lived. "Greetings, Lord Marquis." The maids and attendants hurriedly bowed. Yin Qing, Xiao Dai, and her servant followed behind. Qin Yu waved his hand. "Leave." Everyone bowed and excused themselves. In the bright and exquisite living room, there was only the master and servant left. As they looked at the Marquis Zhongwu in front of them, they couldn't help but feel nervous. After thinking for a moment, Qin Yu bitterly smiled. "Yin Qing, I cannot touch the person who nearly killed you right now. But I guarantee you that I will remember this matter in my heart, and sooner or later I will give you an explanation." Yin Qing bowed. She earnestly said, "Lord Marquis, there is no need to be like this. I have already said that since he is fine, there is no need to pursue the past." Xiao Dai lowered her head, not speaking. A trace of disappointment flashed in her eyes, followed by a bit of ridicule. She thought to herself that the men of this world were truly skilled with their mouths. Their words were so beautiful that one couldn't help but want to believe them. But when it came to fighting, they all turned into soft shrimps. Chinyu glanced at her, the bitter smile on his face deepening. The person who moved against you was the Leaf family of the Western Desolate. Thinking for a moment, he said, the Western Desolate's emperor family is surnamed Zhou, but the direct bloodline of the emperor family is surnamed Li. For instance, that Li Ezhou you met before. Yun Qing's complexion changed. Xiaodai also couldn't help but look up, shock on her face. The Emperor Zhou family, the crown of the emperor family, in the Western Desolate, this was a taboo topic to begin with. In the early years, many people had lost their heads because of this. Although this taboo topic had relaxed a great deal with the passing of time, there were still very few people who dared to talk about it in private. Of course, as long as one knew of this matter, their doubts and puzzlement would never lessen. Although Chinyu didn't say much, the meaning he conveyed left the master and servant startled. Chinyu bitterly smiled as he met their eyes. I won't go so far as to lie to you too about this matter. Yin Qing bowed, her complexion pale. I believe what Lord Marquis says. So, I ask that you do not ask about this matter again. She thought back to when those people who called themselves the Li family faced the subordinates of Six Highness Li Ezhou without any scruples at all. If this was true, then this was the Li family from before the nation's surname. Disregarding how much karma and inside information was hidden, their strength must have been extremely formidable. Otherwise, how could they have sat peacefully in front of the nation's surname until today? Chinyu nodded. Don't be afraid. I can guarantee that I won't provoke the Li family on my own initiative for now. But I will do what I promised you. He smiled, his expression calm. From now on, I will protect you so that no harm comes to you. In the abyss in the past, you have done countless things for me. Now, it is my turn to repay you. Seeing that if he stayed, the master and servant would feel even more uneasy. Chinyu stood up and left. Xiaodai timidly looked up. Miss, this Marquis, loyal marshal. Halfway through her words, she didn't know what to say. Yin Qing bitterly smiled. I don't know what to do either. She was also a loss. She always felt that he was amiable and trustworthy, but she didn't know why his attitude had suddenly changed. Just what was going on. The two old fourth claws glanced at each other, puzzlement in their eyes. They couldn't figure out why the dignified Marquis, loyal marshal, someone who was destined to have a limitless future, would treat this master and servant so differently. Now that everything in this mansion was under their eyes, they could clearly see that Yun Qing and Xiaodai were only ordinary people. In terms of beauty, they could indeed be called extraordinary. But, as old watchdogs of the imperial palace that had lived for countless years, they had seen countless beauties. These two couldn't be considered peak beauties. Could it be that they really were infatuated with each other? If this was true, then this could be considered a good thing for His Majesty. After hesitating for a moment, one of the old fourth claws took out a blue jade talisman. He lifted a hand and touched it. After several breaths of time, he flicked his finger. With a loud hum, the jade talisman trembled and ripples spread out before it instantly vanished from sight. As the son of heaven's trusted aides, they were naturally the son of heaven's eyes and ears. It was true that they guarded the loyal Marshal Marquis mansion and obeyed his orders, but deep down, they were still His Majesty's lackeys. Chapter 1571. Little Meat sneered, not concealing her ridicule at all. They were just two puppies. Did they really think that their noses were sharp enough? This Zhong Wu Ho estate, if I let you see it, then you can see it. If I don't let you see it, then you can only be two blind people with your eyes wide open. However, at the thought that one day she would be forced by two little paparazzi to cover her tracks and aura, her expression turned gloomy. As he looked at Chinyu, his expression darkened. I already said, don't even think about asking me about that woman. Even if you did, it would be useless. Chinyu frowned. He thought for a moment and then said, I don't ask about the past, and I don't investigate the cause and effect. I only want to know what I should do to make her remember me. Do you have any ideas? Meaty shook her head and firmly refused. No. However, her eyes flickered, and it was unknown what she was thinking. She suddenly said, "It's not like you only have me behind you. Since you can't cling on to me, why don't you beg someone else?" These words weren't pleasant to hear, but this was the truth. Qin Yu's expression was calm, without the slightest bit of anger. He knew who Meaty was talking about, but it was too late to hide now, so he really didn't want to take the initiative to summon her. Little Meaty seemed to see through Qin Yu's thoughts. She sneered, "Sometimes I think you are very smart, but sometimes I think you are really stupid." She tapped her fingers on the table. Her movements were a bit strange, as if she had learned them from Qin Yu. That person, what boundary and level is she at? Do you really think that she can't sense anything that happens to her? Humph, humph, humph. What you're doing now is merely burying your head in the sand. Qin Yu's complexion changed. Just now, His Excellency ruler had been in a state of deep sleep in front of him, as if he had been sleeping for many years. As a result, he was able to take advantage of a loophole and was able to live in peace during this period of time. Qin Yu took a deep breath, and a thoughtful look crossed his face. Then, he suddenly glanced at the meat across from him. "Your Excellency, it seems that you wish to see me summon the Sovereign Lord." Ro sneered. "So what if you can tell? I didn't intend to hide it from you." She pointed at the door. "I've already pointed you in the right direction. Whether you're willing to try it or not, it's up to you. Take care, I won't see you out." It was only after Qin Yu left the courtyard doors that he reacted. This was his home, okay? But now, he was not in the mood to argue with her. Although the one in Meaty's body had many problems, one of its few merits was that it didn't like to lie. Previously, it was because of this that Qin Yu had used some methods to find out Yin Qing's identity. Moreover, if she said she couldn't say it, then she couldn't say it. She clung to this point and didn't make up some random excuse to fool Qin Yu. In that case, there was a high chance that this sentence was true. The sovereign and Yin Qing, or rather, Liao Shi, had a close relationship. As for Liao Shi, when he left the abyss and returned to the vast Yang world, Qin Yu had already asked His Excellency the ruler. In other words, for some unknown reason, she had lied to Qin Yu. This could clearly support Qin Yu's judgment. The Lord Ruler was related to Liao Shi. After receiving benefits from others, not only did he fail to fulfill his promise, but he also ended up eating into his own stomach. No matter how the heavens were said, it was not right. Thus, Qin Yu had a guilty conscience. He had been avoiding His Excellency ruler, unwilling to face him. But for Liao Shi, he was willing to go against his conscience. Of course, there was another reason, and that was that if the situation was as Meaty said, then His Excellency ruler might have already noticed everything and was just silently watching from the sidelines. Then, the longer he remained silent, the heavier she would sneer at her heart. Sooner or later, she would have to stab him with her blade. So, he might as well throw caution to the wind. In the room, Qin Yu's thoughts stirred. The rules of space and time slightly twisted. In the back residence, Meaty's eyes brightened, revealing a look of anticipation. Then, she lifted a hand and gently pointed forwards, completely concealing the sound that Qin Yu was making so that the two fourth claws wouldn't sense it. For now, she only told Qin Yu that she didn't lie. But she never lied. For instance, the two fourth claws thought they had everything under their control. But in her eyes, there were two old sugar canes that could be gnawed on at any moment, blind and blind. Qin Yu took a deep breath and spread out his arms. The phantom of a sun and moon appeared above his head. Then, there was no then. As his cultivation rose and his strength grew, Qin Yu could faintly feel that his summoning had found its target. But for some unknown reason, His Excellency ruler was like air, not responding at all. Responding. After trying for a long time, Qin Yu frowned. He let out a deep breath, a helpless expression on his face. If His Excellency ruler didn't respond, then there was nothing he could do. After all, this was a summoning ceremony, not a method to forcefully imprison someone. In the back residence, Meaty who was helping Chin conceal his aura, had a gloomy expression. It was clear she was in an extremely bad mood. She endured it for several moments, but in the end, she found it hard to dispel the anger in her chest. She clenched her teeth and cursed. "You old woman, you sure are thick-skinned enough." She had lived for countless years, so she certainly knew how to curse. Not only did she know, but her cursing skills weren't bad either. In that moment, just now, there were countless vicious words swirling around in her heart, but for some reason, she couldn't speak. This caused the unfathomably powerful, mysterious existence hidden in space-time to feel even worse. She couldn't even breathe happily. Nothing came of it. Even if she knew that His Excellency ruler knew about Liao Shi, she still avoided him and could only temporarily set it aside. Luckily, Qin had already found Liao Shi, so there was no need to be too anxious. Second, there was a time limit to hiding. He didn't believe that His Excellency ruler could pretend to be heir forever. In the distance, in a half-abandoned crack between the heavens and earth, the sound of gnashing teeth rang out. Although it was said to be half-abandoned, it wasn't because it had experienced a calamity or some great change. This was because the crack between the heavens and earth was a place where living beings and inanimate objects couldn't enter. When His Excellency ruler barged into it and used it as a resting place to conceal his aura, this place could be considered half-abandoned and no longer possessed the complete characteristics of a crack between the heavens and earth. "You little wench, you are ruthless. You brought a perfectly good pot, and yet you directly threw it onto me. Just you wait, this isn't over. I'll remember this and see how I flip out." After being forcefully woken up and fuming with anger, His Excellency ruler was in an extremely foul mood. He rubbed his messy hair. It was unknown where some starlight came from, but as it sprinkled down on her, she didn't seem sloppy at all. Instead, she seemed like a dreamy fairy. It was truly a kind of chaotic beauty. His Excellency ruler thought for a moment, but before he could think of a way to retaliate, his eyelids began to struggle. He was so tired that he couldn't open his eyes at all. "Just you wait for me to wake up. Then I'll let you experience what it means to be fierce." As he forced himself to say these words, the Excellency ruler's voice rose up like a kitten under the warm sun. Although there was a sound, it was extremely cute. The Grand Court meeting arrived as scheduled. The rules were extremely strict. In the imperial capital, as long as one had the qualifications to enter the imperial palace and meet with the ruler, they had to wear court clothes and participate on time. Being late or absent was a taboo. Even if there were special circumstances, they still had to report ahead of time and obtain permission from the Ministry of Personnel before reporting to His Majesty. Only after receiving a final reply could they ask for leave. Luckily, the Grand Court meeting was held twice a year. Otherwise, the high and mighty officials of the court would likely suffer. Not to mention anything else, just wearing a neat set of court clothes was more complicated the higher one's status was. Qin was deep in the night. There was still a long time before the ninth sun rose, but he had already been woken up by a maid. Luckily, he had been thinking about how to arrange matters regarding Yanqing, so he didn't have to suffer the pain of being woken up in the middle of the night. Inner clothes, outer clothes, watch clothes, cloud patterns, tiger and wolf patterns, purple marquee robes, hanging ornaments, cloud boots. There were dozens of different types, and each one was carefully chosen. What he wore had to conform to etiquette and regulations. He couldn't go overboard in the slightest. There were 3 or 4 maids surrounding Qin, their foreheads dripping with sweat. But a fragrant fragrance wafted through the air, not annoying at all. At some unknown time, little Meaty had arrived with several maids. She glanced at Qin, who was surrounded by the maids, and had his arms outstretched. She curled her lips and lightly snorted. The maids in the residence already knew that their madam's status in the residence was extraordinary. She was incomparable to ordinary women in the capital, so they weren't too respectful to the marquis. They all lowered their heads and didn't say anything, afraid that they would be implicated. Another hour passed. He put on the purple gold crown on his head, and his black hair was neatly combed. Although his current appearance could only be considered ordinary, he still didn't look like much. But as the saying goes, clothes make the man, horse makes the saddle. With this set of marquee court attire on him, he immediately looked a bit more noble and dignified. Meaty's eyes brightened. Qin Yu's disguise might be able to fool others, but it was useless in front of her. This boy had tidied himself up a bit, and he still looked a bit like a dog. When Qin Yu opened his eyes, she had returned to her previous lazy appearance. This is the first grand court meeting. Marquis, be careful and don't violate any taboos. As he spoke, he walked forward. At some point in time, he was holding something in his hand. It was a jade pendant, pure white. There were no cloud patterns or carvings on the surface, so there wasn't anything strange about it. Marquis, take this jade. When you return, remember to return it to me. Hearing this, Qin Yu's fingers tightened. He smiled. Thank you, madam. Meaty rolled her eyes. Qin Yu laughed several times. For her to appear here was already an indication of many things, so there was no need to care about such minor details. Outside the door, Wang Datu respectfully said, General, we should leave. Qin Yu turned and walked away. Without looking back, he waved his hand, the white jade twining around his fingers. Madam, rest assured that I will return soon. The maids all revealed looks of envy. Although there were times when they felt that the relationship between the Marquis and the Madam was a bit strange. But for what they saw today, it seemed that the relationship between them was quite good. It was unknown when the two old four-clawed men had appeared in the courtyard. They were still as listless as before. Their bodies were hunched like two old dogs that were curled up in a ball. But in the darkness of the night, the eyes of the two old four-clawed men seemed to shine. They occasionally swept their eyes around, lightning flashing in their eyes. Qin Yu strode into the courtyard. He faintly smiled and cupped his hands together. I'll have to trouble you too. One of the old four-clawed men nodded. As for the other one, he didn't respond at all. Qin Yu didn't care. After greeting them, he stood up and walked outside. One on the left and one on the right. The two old four-clawed men followed behind him. Wang Data knew where they came from, so he took the initiative to bring his men back several steps. In his words, if it was on the battlefield, then there were many of us brothers, and we could certainly protect the general. But in the imperial capital, not only were there many bastards, but most of them were ruthless and tyrannical in their strength. Moreover, there were too few of them, so they could only serve as foils. There wasn't anything to be disheartened about. The country bumpkins of the border army had a good understanding of reality. So, when they first arrived at the imperial capital, they didn't have much confidence in themselves. They felt that the people of the imperial capital were truly extraordinary. Once the general was bestowed the title of Marquis of Loyal Marshal, he would become a hot and powerful figure in the imperial capital. At that time, Wang San would even dare to put on airs in Li Zhou's temporary imperial residence. Little Meaty watched Qin Yu leave. A smile lifted the corners of her lips, but it disappeared in a flash. She yawned and said, Stop looking. You sluts are doomed to have no chance. Hurry up and disperse. She prepared to go back and sleep. As for Qin Yu's safety, she had even given him the jade, so he would naturally be fine. Little Meaty was confident in this. As he stepped out of the residence, Qin Yu frowned. He glanced around at the darkness where the light couldn't reach. But behind him, the two old four-clawed men had calm expressions. He thought for a moment and then ignored them. In the eastern city, where the vermilion flowers gathered, the vast majority of mansions had the qualifications to participate in the super meeting. Thus, the normally quiet street was unexpectedly bustling with activity as the sky darkened. As Qin Yu walked towards the carriage, he became aware of several gazes from the surroundings. Looking back, most of these people were dressed in court attire and cupping their hands and greeting from afar. Compared to the surrounding mansions, the Loyal Marshal Marquis Mansion was a completely new upstart. But their authority couldn't be faked, and the trust they had in the Imperial Palace was even more enviable. The various elders of the Emperor clans had already chosen to retreat. Although the agreement of 100 years was a secret, those with the qualifications to know would naturally know. Disregarding everything else, at least for the next 100 years, the loyal Marshal Marquis Ningqin's status would be as stable as Mount Tai, and it might even rise further. The matters of the future could be discussed in the future. Right now, he had to maintain good relations with them. Qin Yu cupped his hands together in return. Without exchanging any pleasantries, he bent down and pushed open the door to the carriage. The two old four-clawed men were still standing on the left and right. The carriage driver paled. He gulped and cracked his whip. Pa! The carriage wheels turned and drove towards the imperial palace. At this time, a light breeze blew through the night, carrying with it a faint smell of blood. It tumbled on the street for a moment before dissipating from sight. Two corpses lay not too far away, their eyes wide open. The old Yi family's iron guard only revealed a pair of eyes beneath his helmet. His eyes were icy cold, without the slightest fluctuation of emotion. His figure was like a fox. His feet were silent as he passed through the darkness, rapidly chasing after the carriage. And at the same time, the other iron guards, as well as the other 9, walked through the darkness, completing their bloody harvest. At today's imperial capital's grand court meeting, it was destined that there would be a great storm. Chapter 1572. His Majesty is Fishing. The Yi family's old patriarch had a calm expression. He wore a plain robe and sat on a sandalwood chair, quietly drinking tea. Of course not. The old patriarch didn't have the qualifications to enter the imperial palace to participate in the court meeting. Many years ago, when he returned to the capital, he received a decree from His Majesty. The old general was old and didn't need to attend the court meeting. To say that he was old was really old. The old patriarch had assisted 3 generations of emperors and was an important minister of 3 dynasties. Who knew how many people were hoping that the old man would give up and return to the West as soon as possible. With a stomp of his leg and his last breath, he would be gone with a plop so that others would have more time to breathe. But the old patriarch was still alive and well. Although he was a bit withered, as long as he was alive, he would be the Yi family's stabilizing force, a military god that no one dared to provoke. The one standing in front of him was a pitiful fellow who was missing a leg and a hand. When he woke up after fighting with the barbarians in the border army, he had become like this. He didn't cry or make a fuss. After he recovered from his injuries, he would follow the old patriarch back to the imperial capital. These years, he had lived in seclusion in the Yi family's old residence. There weren't many people who had seen him, but the direct descendants of the Yi family all knew that the old patriarch had a brilliant strategist who was missing a leg and a hand. These years, every major event would be discussed with him. He was one of the few people who could influence the old patriarch's thoughts. The two sat across from each other. This pitiful fellow who was missing a leg and a hand, as well as half of his body that had been neatly cut off, must have had a hard time surviving. But he clearly didn't feel that he was pitiful. His eyes flowed with a faint light. Yi Bohu is a smart man. Otherwise, you wouldn't have failed to gain the upper hand in your repeated battles over the years. He must have seen that His Majesty was fishing. Even if he made a move, he wouldn't have used the Yi family's strength. The old patriarch put down his teacup and faintly smiled. That's right. But this time, His Majesty didn't want to fish Yi Bohu. Taking a step back, even if Yi Bohu was stupid enough to go into battle naked, His Majesty would still let go of the hook. After all, more haste makes less speed. This matter needs to be done slowly. It's not perfect, but it's best to minimize some losses. The military counselor, who was missing a limb, said lightly, His Majesty wants a reason so that he can continue to act against the Yi family after the storm in the capital has passed. Pausing for a moment, he frowned. But besides that, I always feel that there are other reasons. After all, Our Majesty's plans have always been grand. If he continues to target the Yi family just to get a groundless pain, isn't that a little too petty? The old man glanced at the darkness of the night, illuminated by the lanterns outside the courtyard. If the Yi family doesn't make a move, there won't be many people who would dare to kill the Golden General in the capital. The eyes of the military advisor, which was missing a limb, burst with a bright light. Hui Chui Pavilion. He looked up. Your Majesty doesn't have a reason to fall out with them. So, the only possible reason is to take advantage of this opportunity to make a deal. For instance, killing them with a borrowed knife. The old man smiled and nodded. Although Yuan Kuei had lost an arm and a leg and had become a cripple struggling at death's door, in his eyes, Yuan Kuei was still a rare and extremely intelligent person. His Majesty's plans were naturally far-sighted. Today's storm in the capital was only a prelude to a thunderous storm in the future. There was never a lack of intelligent people in the world. But beneath an overt plot, everything was vast and mighty. Like a great river sweeping up, there was no room for choice. Ibohu could see that His Majesty was fishing. But even so, he could only follow His Majesty's intentions. Otherwise, did he really think that if the Yi family was obedient and didn't move at all, His Majesty would be lenient? Of course not. So, even though he knew this, he still had to move forward. Yi Bohu had always respected His Majesty. Today, in the darkness of the night, he felt even more respect. He was neatly dressed in the court robes of a first-class marquis. With the flood dragon emblem of the Empire's military commander, his momentum was boundless, as if he could swallow mountains and rivers. "Marshal, it's time to leave." Yi Bohu turned around and walked out with large strides. His expression was calm, firm, and steady. In a game with His Majesty, his chances of victory weren't high. But he still had to try. What if there was a pleasant surprise? For instance, if General Ning Qin really did die today, in the darkness of the Grand Court meeting. At that time, His Majesty in the Imperial Palace, the old Yi family's old turtle, as well as those withered, rotten trees that feared death, would surely have wonderful expressions on their faces. The carriage was supported by an array formation, so there weren't any bumps as it traveled. The carriage was quiet and tranquil. As today's bait, it would be a lie if Qin Yu said that he wasn't annoyed at all. But no matter how annoyed he was, he still chose to fully cooperate. After all, the existence of the Yi family, whether it was from a personal grudge or a righteous point of view, was an existence that he had to eradicate. The entire journey was quiet, but Qin Yu was well aware that in this quiet, the slaughter had already begun. The old Yi family's 10 iron guards were truly astonishing. Those ghostly assassins were found and killed one at a time, not giving them a chance to approach the carriage. The 2 old guards sat on the driver's left and right. Their heads were drooped, as if they had woken up too early and were exhausted. Calculating the time, the residents and the Imperial Palace had already crossed more than half the distance. In just a moment, the carriage would arrive at the Imperial Palace. At that time, today's assassination attempt would become a joke. The Imperial Palace was the absolute home field of the Western Wasteland Great Emperor. No one dared to provoke his dignity. If they dared to do so, they would undoubtedly die. There was simply no chance of success. The place where the destiny of a country gathered was tyrannical and tyrannical. So, if they wanted to kill Qin Yu, they could only do it before the carriage arrived at the Imperial Palace. The red rope wrapped around his fingertips. The white jade in his hand released a cool feeling, making Qin Yu's consciousness unprecedentedly clear. Then, an incomparably powerful intuition appeared in his mind. The other party's true killing move hadn't arrived yet. Suddenly, there was a stuffy cough in the darkness, followed by the sound of something falling to the ground. Qin Yu turned his head, a grim look in his eyes. This was the first time that the old Yi family's iron guards had been knocked to the ground. Although Qin Yu couldn't see the specific details, the image of a tall and sturdy figure that had fallen to the ground appeared in his mind. Beneath the visor, the only eye that could be seen was shock, anger, and unwillingness. Finally, the light faded away, leaving behind only darkness. Looking down at the white jade, Qin Yu guessed that it should be because of it, but this definitely wasn't its full effect. This mysterious existence that hid space and time naturally wouldn't make such a simple move. Beside the carriage driver, the 2 fourth claws opened their eyes at the same time. In their dim and turbid eyes, it was like a thunderstorm had broken through the layers of clouds, revealing their bodies to the world. "Drive the carriage properly," Don't worry about anything else. One of the fourth claws said in a soft voice. His voice was gloomy and slippery, like a viper coiled around his neck, hissing and flicking out its tongue. The carriage driver nodded vigorously. He gulped, his complexion becoming increasingly pale. There was another dull thud, followed by the sound of a round object rolling around. Like this, an armored head rolled in front of the carriage. Pa! His head exploded, and a mass of red and white matter splashed everywhere. Each drop was like an arrow that had been shot from a drawn bow. The fourth claws chuckled. He lifted a hand and grasped forwards. Space suddenly twisted, turning into an invisible barrier. Bang, bang, bang. Dull thumping sounds rang out one after another, striking the surface of the barrier. Ripples spread out, but they couldn't penetrate it in the least. Don't just stand there. Hurry up. It's getting late. We can't delay the Marquis from entering the palace. Fourth Claw lifted his head and looked at the dark night sky. His eyes were filled with mockery. When I was playing tricks, you didn't even know which man you were hiding under. Luring the tiger away from the mountain wasn't a good move. The Old Yi family's iron guards were sent out by that old man on his own initiative. Even if they all die, that is a matter of the Old Yi family. It has nothing to do with us. In the darkness, a thin figure carrying a headless corpse looked at the fourth claws from afar. He frowned. He casually tossed aside the iron guard's corpse and turned to leave, his figure disappearing into the darkness. The fourth claws arched an eyebrow. He didn't think that the other would leave just like that. When the head exploded, the red and white matter had splashed out in all directions. This was only a bit of strength left behind after he killed someone. To have such power, it was enough to prove the strength of this assassin. When the two sides looked at each other, the fourth claws originally thought that there would be a battle, but he frowned. His face did not relax, but rather became more serious. Haha, interesting. Today is really interesting. The other fourth claws chuckled. He stuck out his tongue and licked his lips, his eyes filled with heat. Oomph. Be careful. I don't want to have to collect your corpse later. The fourth claws that attacked first spoke with an indifferent tone. No need. If I die, I'll leave my corpse in the wilderness. I've done too many shady things in my life. If I die, I'll vent the anger of the heavens. Perhaps I'll have a chance to reincarnate in my next life. Good. The two fourth claws became tranquil again, but their backs were straight, and the wrinkles on their faces were much less than before. A powerful aura was drawn, but not released. It was like lava raging underground, ready to soar into the sky at any moment. At this moment, not too far from the imperial palace, they could already sense a terrifying aura in the air. Like mercury pouring into the world, it was difficult to breathe. Even moving one's hands and feet was difficult. There was a powerhouse, an absolute powerhouse. A plain robe. He walked in the darkness, his sleeves clear like the wind, his shoulders shouldering the mountains and rivers. Like a great sun descending, he was so bright that one couldn't look at him directly. The two fourth claws narrowed their eyes at the same time. They looked at the middle-aged guest that was walking towards them. The eyesores of the Old Yi family iron guards had now sunk into the dark mud. Some had already died, some were entangled, and their cards were completely wasted. There was no way for them to entangle the middle-aged guest in front of them. This was also an overt plot. Mr. Zhou, I didn't think that you would come today, the fourth claws said with interest. But now his complexion was very dull, dark, and gloomy. The middle-aged guest's robes fluttered in the wind. His sleeves fluttered in the wind, his expression calm. Since you two recognize me, will you move aside, or will you die? With a sharp laugh, the fourth claws slapped the carriage. His figure shot out like an arrow. I have admired Mr. Zhou for a long time, so how could I move aside? The air was torn apart with an ear-piercing sound. The temperature in the air dropped rapidly. As the fourth claw punched out, an ice dragon suddenly appeared. Its body was covered with bright yellow scales, and there was a royal dragon aura circulating around it. The dragon energy became increasingly vivid. With a loud roar, it opened its mouth and fiercely swallowed. The middle-aged guest had a calm expression. As he saw the ice dragon howl towards him, he lifted a hand and pointed a finger. With a mournful cry and a boundless momentum, it rapidly approached the ice dragon. In front of it, the phantom of a translucent mountain appeared. Although it was a phantom, it released an endless momentum. It was like a towering mountain, unmoving like a great mountain. Although the ice dragon was strong, it could rely on its own strength to shake the heavens and earth. This was no different from striking a stone with an egg. Before the mournful cry fell, there was a heaven-shaking explosion. The mountain phantom didn't even tremble, but the ice dragon had already been smashed into countless pieces. Halfway through, the fourth claws cried out and hurriedly drew back. Like a boulder, he smashed into the ground. With a loud bang, the ground instantly caved in, forming a terrifying crater. Countless cracks appeared around the crater, spreading out in all directions like a spider web. The middle-aged guest frowned. He took a step and shot into the skies. In the next moment, the ground beneath him broke apart. In front of the mountain phantom, the shattered ice dragon shot into the skies. It opened its great mouth, revealing fierce fangs. It was just a hair away from tearing the middle-aged guest to pieces. But this tiny bit of awareness was an insurmountable moat. The middle-aged guest flicked his sleeves and space suddenly twisted. Like a net, it sucked in the soaring ice dragon. Then, space twisted, wildly collapsing and contracting. Angry roars echoed out, turning into pained wails. Finally, the ice dragon that was sucked into the twisting space turned into a white bead, completely lifeless. Puff! The fourth claws spat out a mouthful of blood, his face pale. He lifted a hand and wiped it away. He chuckled. Mr. Zhou is truly fierce. The middle-aged guest said, Today I want to kill someone, so I don't have time to waste with you. If you don't move aside, don't blame me for not giving His Majesty face. The fourth claws laughed. Mr. Zhou's words don't make sense. After you came to the imperial capital, His Majesty has treated you with respect. The middle-aged guest stepped forwards, not giving him a chance to delay for time. The Western Wasteland's imperial capital was the place where the destiny of a country gathered. Even with his cultivation, he was absolutely powerless to resist it. Since he had attacked, he had to kill Marquis Zhongwu in the carriage in the shortest possible time. Bang! With a loud explosion, the fourth claws was sent flying backwards. Blood spurted out from his nose and mouth. But it was unknown what material his robe was made of, but it was still intact. In fact, after being stained with the blood that the fourth claws had spat out, the eyes of the python on his robe brightened, as if it were about to come to life. Guard the carriage. The other fourth claws shouted out loud and shot into the skies, blocking the fourth claws that had been sent flying backwards. He coldly sneered, You can die, and even leave your corpse in the wilderness is fine. But the matter that His Majesty gave us hasn't been completed yet, so you cannot die now. The fourth claws spat out a mouthful of blood. The injured fourth claws diabolically grinned. I'm fine. I won't die just yet. He looked up, his eyes filled with incomparable hatred as they fell on the middle-aged guest. Pitiful people in the imperial palace. They've lived in the mud for so many years, and now that they can die with a character like Mr. Zhou, they could be considered to have gained some face. The middle-aged guest, Mr. Zhou, remained expressionless, unmoved in the least. He didn't feel any fear just because the two fourth claws had joined forces. He continued forwards. His feet were steady and calm, as if even 1,000 mountains and 10,000 rivers could be trampled flat. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, the two fourth claws seemed to withstand a weight of 10,000 tons. It was only by struggling that they didn't fall down. Their eyes flashed with an ominous light. This time, it wasn't just their nose and mouth that were bleeding. Fine cracks began to appear on their exposed skin. Dark red beads of blood appeared from these cracks, gradually seeping into the robe on their bodies. Chapter 1573. The middle-aged guest continued forwards, his tone calm. Let's not waste any more time. Let me experience the true abilities of the Imperial Palace's fourth claw. Their bodies were bathed in blood, and their expressions were fierce. The two fourth claws glanced at each other, knowing that today was the deadline. Since Mr. Zhou thinks highly of us, then we won't disappoint you. Although the celestial silkworm scripture is a law formula that is cultivated by an incomplete person, we feel that there are still some merits to it. Mr. Zhou, please advise us. With a sharp cry, the python robes on the two fourth claws came to life. It was like a giant mouth that swallowed the two fourth claws. The sound of chewing was accompanied by the tearing of flesh and bone. The two claws of the fourth brother were completely devoured. Thus, the serpent on the robe really came to life. Its body fell heavily to the ground, and it stuck out its tongue and hissed. Its eyes were filled with violence as it stared at the middle-aged man. The celestial silkworm scripture cultivation method was like a silkworm eating mulberry leaves and spinning silk. It cultivated the set of clothes worn by the fourth claw. After cultivating it, this cultivation method would reach large success. With a single leap, it would become the highly respected fourth claw of the Imperial Palace. But at the same time, it would also be digging a path to death for itself. Once it risked its life in battle, it would sacrifice itself and use its blood essence and soul as nourishment to awaken the flood serpent on the python robes, allowing it to display its strongest might. Of course, this method was a one-time use. After using it, the fourth claw would die. Its soul would scatter, and it wouldn't be able to enter samsara. This was why they were talking about exposing their corpses in the wilderness and asking for a chance to reincarnate in their next life. In truth, after they died, they wouldn't leave behind a corpse, so it was impossible for them to enter samsara. The middle-aged guest, Mr. Zhou, furrowed his eyebrows. It wasn't that he couldn't bear to continue cultivating such a cruel cultivation method, but that only the imperial palace that controlled the destiny of a country would dare to recklessly cultivate it without any worries that there would be evil creatures haunting them. He naturally came prepared today. Moreover, the celestial silkworm scripture in the Western Wasteland Imperial Palace wasn't a secret to begin with. Looking at the two flood serpents roaring into the heavens, the middle-aged guest flipped his hand. Like a vast lotus leaf, it covered the entire world. As the saying goes, when the nest is overturned, there are no intact eggs. The entire world was suppressed, so it was naturally difficult for him to escape. The two sin flood serpents howled miserably, their enormous bodies crazily thrashing about. However, the ground and space around them were extremely stable, not showing the slightest sign of breaking. It was as if there was an invisible force suppressing everything in the world, including the two of them. Many golden jade characters appeared on the surface of the evil flood dragon's massive body. They did not look eye-catching, but in reality, every one of them was extremely heavy. The pressure caused Niemang's scales to shatter and his flesh to rupture. The incomparably powerful Niemang's body became a bloody mess. In the middle-aged man's eyes, there was some regret and reluctance. But time waited for no man, and he had no time to hesitate. Pa, with a soft sound, a jade tablet hanging from his waist directly shattered into pieces. The golden jade characters on the surface of the evil flood dragon's body shined with light at the same time, branding into its flesh and steaming it. Black mist rose up, and mournful howls came from within. The heavenly silkworm scripture required one to be dressed like a silkworm, eating mulberry leaves and spinning silk. But silkworms ate mulberry leaves. What did Lao Si's Wu Li, who had cultivated successfully in the palace, eat? This was the true origin of the word cruel. The two Lao Si's Wu Li had sacrificed themselves to summon the two evil flood dragons. Now, they were on the verge of death. No matter how much they struggled, they would not be able to escape. It wasn't that they weren't strong, but that the middle-aged man, Mr. Zhou, was one of the most terrifying figures in the imperial capital. Huaitsue Pavilion had been able to move him so easily because the customer had paid them enough. Secondly, they had enough connections to actually find Mr. Zhou's residence and reach an agreement with him. Presumably, His Majesty in the imperial palace would be surprised and even a little disappointed by this. After all, he had originally wanted to recruit this middle-aged man and add another bargaining chip to the Western Desolate. Although he was an abandoned person from the central desolate divine continent, his talent and potential were clearly seen by the Western Desolate Emperor, who controlled the fate of the nation. The middle-aged man was an existence that had the qualifications to break through to the Emperor realm. All of this, the middle-aged man in the night was naturally aware of it. However, he didn't regret his actions today. The woman on the sickbed was the crux of his love and also someone he had to save. He took a step forward and appeared outside the carriage. The middle-aged man's expression was calm. There was no guilt or killing intent as he pointed forward. Protect the general. Big Head and the other border soldiers surrounding the carriage had long since been stunned by the slaughter in front of them. Their faces were all pale and their legs trembled. But when the middle-aged man flew over, he shouted and unsheathed his blade, jumping out without hesitation. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't afraid. However, his mind was blank, and he didn't have time to think. Our general, of course. But we can't die here. As for whether or not we can block the attack, and how useful it will be, Big Head didn't have time to think. In any case, the lives of us border army bumpkins are cheap. If we die, then so be it. We just need to repay the general's kindness. In reality, it wasn't of much use. Although Big Head and the other border soldiers weren't afraid of death, they were sent flying before they could even charge forward. They spat out blood and rolled on the ground. Although they were battered and exhausted, they weren't truly fatal. Although the middle-aged man had left his hometown and became an exiled person, he still abided by the precepts of a gentleman and didn't recklessly kill. Of course, if he wanted to kill someone, then that was a different matter. As the saying goes, a gentleman does what he says, and what he doesn't, it all depended on his mood. These words were definitely nonsense, but it was a catchphrase that Junior Master often used in the past. Because of this, the elders of the academy had a headache, but they couldn't do anything about it. After all, Junior Master was the strongest person in the academy. This was something that his teacher had personally admitted. If Junior Master was here today, what would the scene be like? Perhaps he wouldn't be in a hurry to kill. Instead, he would wait for the imperial palace to react. He might even force out the emperor realm overseeing the imperial capital. Then, he would fight to his heart's content and see if the sword in his hand could cut apart this city. The middle-aged man's eyes brightened slightly. Then, he revealed a trace of disappointment. In this life, he would never have the chance to see Junior Master use his sword again. He shook his head and restrained his thoughts. Since he couldn't compare to Junior Master, then he had to kill as soon as possible. Thinking of this, the middle-aged man's eyes became even more solemn. His finger glowed as he pointed. The tip of his finger was like a sword. Apart from the coachman, there were no other obstacles in front of the carriage. Before the finger landed, a terrifying pressure crashed down on the mind like a raging river, intending to shatter the soul. The coachman's face turned even paler. The fear in his eyes suddenly disappeared. His eyes were serious as he looked at the finger. The long whip in his hand shattered inch by inch. There was a sword hidden in the bamboo handle. As he raised his sword, it was as if he was stirring up a river. The surging sword intent was like a stormy sea, and it burst out in a hearty manner. The middle-aged man frowned, surprise in his eyes. He didn't expect that the unremarkable coachman in front of him was a peerless sword cultivator. But as soon as he pointed, the sword was unsheathed and there was no turning back. Thus, the finger moved even faster, colliding with the tip of the sword like a bolt of lightning. The middle-aged man's eyebrows furrowed even tighter. His robes suddenly fluttered, as if a massive amount of gas had been injected into them. His figure floated backwards, his long sleeves fluttering in the wind. He was like an immortal passing through the night, giving off an extraordinary aura. He quietly landed on the ground. The middle-aged man looked at the coachman, or more accurately, at the short sword in his hand. It was said to be short because the sword wasn't long. But the sword intent contained within was so long that it couldn't be calculated. Simply put, from here to there, it was longer than the heavens. What is the name of this sword? The coachman's face turned even paler, like clean high-grade rice paper. But his breathing was still long and gentle. The sword's name is Winding River. It uses an ancient river as its foundation and was refined with a transcendent supernatural power. For it to be passed down to me is already a bit of a disgrace. The middle-aged man nodded, agreeing with these words. The coachman's cultivation realm was high, and he was a peerless sword cultivator in the world. But if the sword in his hand was included, then he really wasn't worthy of it. It wasn't that he was weak, but that this sword was far too strong. This was especially true after it was placed in the Western Wasteland Imperial Palace, tempered by the destiny of the nation and nourished for many years. It had been silent for thousands of years, but today, with a single sword strike, the sword energy was so long that it could split apart the heavens. Since it could even split apart the heavens, how could it not split apart people? After all, no matter how strong the middle-aged man, Mr. Zhou, was, he didn't dare to compare with the heavens. If you were strong enough, I would have already died under this sword. The middle-aged man turned to leave, but his body suddenly shook and countless wounds opened up all over his body. Blood gushed out like fountains, dyeing his robes red. A powerful aura rose up like the sun. Fog scattered in all directions, vanishing in the blink of an eye. The coachman revealed a look of admiration. He cupped his hands together and said, "I won today because I have a sword in my hand. Mr. Zhou, rest in peace." Rumble, rumble. The ground trembled like waves crashing against the shore. The imperial guards of the imperial palace were rapidly rushing over. As the middle-aged man walked away, his robes were bathed in blood. Even if he turned to leave, he likely wouldn't be able to. The two fourth-clawed brothers, the evil flood dragons that they had transformed into, had already died. Their corpses were torn apart, and all that was left was a mess. The air was filled with the pungent smell of blood. Wang Datu and the other border guards were shaken away. They vomited blood, but didn't die. They struggled to crawl up and stared at the scene in front of them. They probably didn't think that the middle-aged man who had appeared so insufferably arrogant and ridiculously strong had actually been cut to such a state with a single sword strike. Or perhaps their hearts were filled with complex emotions. They couldn't figure out why these lowly peasants were still alive at this time. The coachman took a deep breath and coughed, a bit of blood splashing out. In using that sword strike just now, he had consumed a tremendous amount of energy. Even his swordsmanship cultivation had shaken a bit. If he wanted to recover, he feared he would have to go into seclusion for a long time and spend a great deal of wealth. He turned and gently knocked on the carriage. "Marquis, the assassin has died. You can go to court in peace." Within the carriage, Qin stared at the carriage door. His expression was dignified, not at all relaxed. In his palm, the originally cool white jade had now become fiery hot, like a red-hot stone. There was nothing in front of him, but he seemed to see a pair of ice-cold eyes on that respectful face. The carriage was quiet. The coachman frowned. He didn't know where he had revealed a flaw, but since he had already been discovered, he might as well make his move. In the next moment, the carriage door shattered. There was no more of the surging waves from before, nor was there any transcendent momentum that seemed to cut through the heavens. The short sword, Winding River, broke through the door and cut straight towards Qin Yu's head. The blade was pitch black, as if it had been attached to the darkness of the world. So, the coachman was the final chess piece today. The reason he was able to force back the middle-aged man who was at his peak just now was because he knew that no matter how strong Mr. Zhou was, no one could kill Qin Yu today. This was because he had the Western Wasteland's loyal Marquis seal on him, and this seal had been quietly infused with the power of Joss flames. Thus, the coachman had slashed out with his sword just now to sever the middle-aged man's life force. Although he had paid a great price, he had allowed Winding River to exhaust all of the Western Wasteland's national destiny, allowing it to restore its true appearance and display the true might of Winding River. If a sword fell, it could sever Joss flames. The loyal Marquis seal On Qin Yu's body shattered. The power of Joss flames was invisible and tangible, turning into a bubble. But now, in a normal situation, this bubble could block even a half-step sovereign for a moment. But in front of Winding River, it was as fragile as a bubble. The sword shattered as it fell. The sword edge didn't stop at all, continuing to fall towards Qin Yu's head. With the sharpness of this sword, even a ruler would be instantly killed. Their body and soul would be extinguished without the least bit of life left. Ding! There was a light sound, as if a sharp blade had touched iron. The sword-wielding coachman's eyes widened in shock and horror. The shaking strength was like raging waves, flowing up his arm and crashing into his chest. For a time, the sounds of bones breaking rang out without end. The sword-wielding coachman's hand had already turned into white bones. His flesh and blood ruptured and shattered, turning into a fog of blood. He tumbled backwards and took out a talisman. Then, he tore it apart and vanished. As for that short sword, Winding River, it had broken into countless pieces that fell in front of Qin Yu. However, the broken sword wasn't sharp at all. Rather, it became soft, like a puddle of water that wrapped around the broken pieces and gradually fused back together. The sounds of killing shook the heavens. They came from a distance, accompanied by cries of alarm and the sound of heavy objects crashing to the ground. Qin Yu frowned. He stood atop the broken carriage. The two fine horses that had been pulling the carriage had already been turned into two piles of meat paste when the middle-aged man and the coachman clashed. Imperial palace guards surrounded the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man who had just left was forced back once more. The wounds on his body gushed out like fountains, and blood gushed out. After his robes were soaked in blood, they fell to the ground. Wherever he went, he would leave behind a series of bloody footprints. But the middle-aged man still didn't fall. Even though he had become a tattered leather bag that was leaking water everywhere, he still raised his hand and sent the Imperial Palace guards flying away. It was unknown whether he was dead or alive. Suddenly, the middle-aged man sighed. He looked up at Qin Yu. His eyes were tired and gloomy, but there was no fear or unwillingness in them. There was only a bit of calm helplessness. Marquis Zhongwu, I am about to die, but I promised someone that I would go back and see her. Can you let me leave in exchange for this piece of jade? He held up a piece of black jade. It was nearly soaked in blood, but it wasn't stained in the least. Qin Yu glanced at the man and nodded. All right. The Imperial Palace guard hesitated. Qin Yu lightly said, I will bear the consequences of this matter. The Imperial Guard withdrew. The middle-aged man glanced at Qin Yu, smiled, and left. As Qin Yu watched the bloodied man leave, a complex look appeared in his eyes. This person was the strongest cultivator that Qin Yu had seen with his own eyes, the one that was destined to die. Even if he hadn't entered the Emperor realm, there was likely a limit to how far he could go. Such a character was actually willing to be ordered around and die in the darkness of the night. Qin Yu took a deep breath and calmed his mind. He jumped off the carriage and walked forward, his feet treading on the blood. Chapter 1574. The loyal Marshal Marquis Ning Qin stepped into the Imperial Palace, drenched in blood and surrounded by armored guards. At this time, everyone was watching. In the depths of a wide alley, there was a brothel filled with red lights. But today, it was pitch black and quiet, similar to a haunted house. It was unknown where the girls and guests who came here to seek pleasure had gone. The middle-aged man, who was still bleeding and had an extremely pale face, left a trail of bloody footprints on the clean wooden floor of the brothel. His expression was calm. Even the unwillingness and helplessness in his eyes had faded away, leaving behind only a calm expression. The middle-aged man didn't seem surprised at all. He only silently walked forwards, clearly having found the person he was looking for. Passing through a long corridor, he reached out a hand and pushed the door open. Faint traces of light flowed out from within. The woman sitting at the round table was the owner of this brothel. But now, there was no longer any charm left behind. All that was left was a calm and composed expression. At this time, she stood up and bowed. Her appearance and demeanor were like that of a noble lady, inviolable and inviolable. "Huichue Hall." "Thank you, Mr. Zhou." The middle-aged man had an indifferent expression. "I didn't care that I failed to kill you and ended up becoming a chess piece in your hands. But, according to our previous agreement, as long as I make a move, regardless of success or failure, the item must be given to me, as long as I am alive." The woman revealed a look of guilt. Her expression became even more sincere and respectful. "Mr. is truly righteous. The reason I waited here was to fulfill my promise and personally deliver it to Mr." With a flip of her hand, a wooden box appeared. It was squarish, and there was not a single trace of carving on it. Not even the opening could be found. The middle-aged man had already sensed the aura hidden within the wooden box. He nodded and said, "Thank you." The woman didn't dare to accept his thanks. She moved to the side and offered the wooden box with both hands. The middle-aged man took it and turned to leave. The bloody footprints changed direction, fading into the darkness as they went further and further away. The woman with extraordinary looks and temperament widened her eyes, revealing shock and astonishment. In the next moment, a line of blood quietly appeared on her fair neck. Then, her head fell to the ground. She had taken the risk of staying in the brothel and waiting for the middle-aged man to arrive. She was indeed representing Huichue Hall to complete the transaction with Mr. Zhou. But, as the middle-aged man had said, everything was built on the foundation that he was still alive. In other words, after the middle-aged man died, the items in the wooden box could remain in Huichue restaurant. Of course, the woman didn't want to take it for herself. She didn't dare and couldn't do it, but as long as she kept the wooden box and obtained Mr. Zhou's head, it would be a great contribution. However, the woman did not expect that the deadly poison she had smeared on the surface of the wooden box was completely ineffective against the middle-aged man. Most importantly, he was already injured to such an extent that he could die at any moment. Yet, he still possessed the ability to kill with a single glance. However, the report clearly stated that the middle-aged man had lost his divine powers when facing the Dharch Palace's Imperial Guards. Did the middle-aged man hide something, or did someone in the building want her to die on purpose? There were two possibilities, but there was no way for the woman to investigate the truth of this matter. The middle-aged man stepped out of Huichue restaurant and landed on the ground. His eyes became even more dim, like the last fallen leaf on a branch in late autumn, struggling and unwilling to part, rolling and struggling in the rustling autumn wind. One step up, one step down. He staggered and reached out a hand to support himself. The middle-aged man's breathing finally became chaotic. He took several deep breaths, and a bitter smile appeared on his face. "Little Zhou, is that you?" The woman's weak voice sounded out, filled with anxiety. The middle-aged man took a deep breath. He lifted a finger and pointed between his eyebrows. A cool breeze surrounded his body. It was unknown what supernatural ability he used, but his horrifying injuries instantly healed without a trace. Even that wide-sleeve robe that had been soaked in blood was now as clean as new. With a ruddy complexion and bright eyes, the middle-aged man stepped out. He smiled and responded, "It's me." He walked to the sickbed and sat down. He held the woman in his arms. "Don't worry. I said that I would come back alive to see you. I won't disappoint you." The emaciated, sickly woman nodded with a smile. The middle-aged man took out a wooden box and placed it on the woman's chest. "I finally found the thing that can save you. You only need to sleep. When you wake up, all your pain and suffering will pass." He lowered his head and gently kissed the woman in his arms. Guilt filled his eyes. "But I'm afraid I can't continue to accompany you. The commotion this time was too great, and I didn't succeed. I must temporarily leave the imperial capital to avoid the investigation from the Western Desolate." The sickly woman's eyes widened. Her lips moved as if she wanted to say something, but the wooden box on her body had already begun to emit light. Faint traces of mist fused into her body through her orifices, restoring her withered body. At the same time, she felt an irresistible weariness. The middle-aged man's appearance became blurry, but his smile was still as warm and gentle as before. "Sleep. I will definitely come back to find you." The woman fell asleep. The middle-aged man looked down for several breaths of time and then began to cough. He covered his mouth and carefully put the woman down. His footsteps were a bit hurried. He turned around and walked behind the screen, stepping into the darkness. The moment that the middle-aged man's figure submerged into the darkness, there was a loud puff, like a spring breaking through the shackles above. At the imperial court meeting, the Western Desolate Great Emperor was enraged. Because of the assassination of Marquis Zhongwu, he severely reprimanded the imperial capital's garrison. Several great generals of the military fell to their knees and begged for forgiveness. As for the nobles of the imperial court who hadn't been involved in this matter, they coldly watched from the sidelines. The military was powerful and suppressed all sides. They were happy to watch these great generals lose face without suffering any losses. But at the same time, everyone subconsciously looked towards Marquis Zhongwu. Because of the several great generals stepping out, there were fewer people present. Not too far away from the imperial palace, although the details of the assassination hadn't been revealed yet, they already knew the approximate details. The degree of terror and horror was so great that even those watching from the perspective of a bystander felt terrified. Cold sweat dripped down their backs. But Marquis Zhongwu, Ning Qin, was still alive and well. Besides his pale complexion, there was no sign of any injuries. It was simply terrifying. Finally, at the imperial court meeting, His Majesty brazenly issued a decree to remove Yi Yuantai, who had just become one of the leading generals of the imperial capital's garrison. And he was born in the Yi family. He was one of the most important chess pieces in the imperial capital's layout. Sharp edges were revealed. Killing intent was revealed. The complexions of all the important officials in the imperial court changed. Although they knew that the emperor races had thoughts of punishing the Yi family, such cruel and ruthless actions were likely to trigger irreparable consequences. To the Western Desolate, this was the worst possible result. Yi Bohu respectfully begged for forgiveness. He expressed that his lack of discipline had caused Yi Yuantai to fail in his duty and that he was willing to accept His Majesty's punishment. The great emperor sat high above. He glanced at the begging Yi Bohu. Just as the officials were worried that His Majesty would take advantage of this victory and beat up the Yi family, the great emperor suddenly laughed and scolded him. He said that the Yi family was a great family, so he couldn't have Yi Bohu take responsibility for every little thing that happened. He told him to stand up and return to the ranks. As for the assassination matter, it was easily forgotten. Following that, the imperial court meeting peacefully came to an end. As the great emperor stood up and left, Yi Bohu suddenly walked forwards. The complexions of the officials changed, and they moved to the sides of their own accord. That person from the Yi family wasn't present, so he was the one with the highest status and strongest strength in today's court. Even though he was disliked by His Majesty and the Yi family was in a precarious situation, as long as the dust didn't settle, no one dared to underestimate him. Qin Yu looked up at Yi Bohu. Yi Bohu's expression was calm, but Qin Yu could feel endless killing intent from this calmness. It was biting cold and cruel, like a tiger that had come down the mountain, its eyes locked onto its prey. Marquis Loyal Marshal, there seems to be some misunderstanding between you and me. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. General Yi is too serious. I have always admired the Yi family. Even if there were some small problems, they have already been resolved. Yi Bohu's lips curved up in a smile. Resolved? That's a good word. I like it. He stepped forwards and patted Qin Yu's shoulder. We are both from the military. If there is a chance in the future, we should get closer. Qin Yu smiled. Definitely. Yi Bohu turned and walked away. His steps were like that of a dragon and like a tiger, his momentum extraordinary. Within the imperial capital, it had been many years since such a vile thing had occurred. An important minister of the court had been assassinated on the streets during a court session. The implications were far-reaching and had to be investigated to the end. Otherwise, what face would the dignified Western wasteland empire have left? One of the leading generals of the Imperial Guard, Yi Yuantai, had been deposed on the spot. The stern general of the Imperial Guard gnashed his teeth and locked down the entire city. Hui Chui Pavilion, which had already hidden itself in the shadows, was brutally dragged into the sunlight. Pursuit, counterattack, escape, a series of events erupted, causing the current imperial capital to be much more chaotic and tense than it had been in the past. On such a day, a middle-aged man holding a letter walked through the closed city gates. He turned and waved his hand at the city guard. The guard immediately revealed a brilliant smile, his eyes full of eagerness. The middle-aged man faintly smiled. He feared that this Lord General's joy would all come to naught. His current status and appearance were all borrowed. Even if it could be said from a certain point of view that it couldn't be any more real, the promises he made had no possibility of being fulfilled. It was wrong to lie, but there was nothing he could do. He couldn't just swagger into the western wasteland imperial capital to die, right? TSK, TSK. The middle-aged man grinned, revealing a smile that was completely different from before. His figure merged into the crowd and disappeared. At the city gates, the city guard wiped away his saliva. His face was red as if he had drunk several liters of wine. His feet felt light and weak. The trusted subordinate glanced at his superior and said with a bitter smile, "General, the old men of the military are really angry. Even Lord Yi Yuantai has been removed from his position on the spot. You let people into the imperial capital without permission. If this matter is discovered, it will be very difficult to resolve." The guard glanced at him and coldly smiled. "You bunch of bastards, are you afraid of being implicated by me? Oomph. A bunch of ungrateful wretches. If it wasn't for me, would you be where you are today?" The group of soldiers obviously knew that their superior was a coward. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been stuck in the position of a city guard for so many years, unable to be promoted no matter what. Today, he dared to risk universal condemnation and let that middle-aged man with an air of nobility in. He definitely had absolute confidence. The problem should be that the middle-aged man had taken out the token that only the general had seen. But the key was that although they could guess it, they still felt uneasy. After all, his neck was already tied to his belt. Who knew when it would fall off? Looking at his trusted subordinate who had seen it with a smile, the guard's mouth twitched. He couldn't suppress the joy in his heart and revealed a secret. What do you know? That is the nobility of Wudong County. He can even enter and leave the imperial palace freely, let alone our small city gate. Would I dare to stop him? I'm the one who is really tired of living. The nobility of Wudong County could enter and leave the imperial palace freely. Thinking of a taboo topic that had been mentioned before, the group of subordinates' faces changed. Then, they looked at their superior and their eyes became fervent. "Damn it, you bastard, if you don't get promoted, how can we get promoted and get rich?" The city gate guard smiled in satisfaction. "Shut up. All of you shut up. If you know that this is a crime that will cost your head, then don't speak nonsense." The group of subordinates said yes, yes, yes. The general must have worked hard and come drink some water. Someone suggested that after today's shift, they should treat the general to a drink. Some people even mentioned their own little sister, niece, and their cousin's wife. The city gate guard smiled and nodded again and again. Zhongwu Marquis Mansion. They had arrived. This was the place. The middle-aged man lightly coughed. He revealed a dignified and noble aura. It couldn't be any more real. He was about to step forward and knock on the door. However, right at this moment, his body suddenly stiffened and his eyes widened in astonishment. It was like spring water that had suddenly turned into ice under extreme cold and was directly sealed within. Hiss! The middle-aged man sucked in a breath of cold air and turned to leave. But before he could take a single step, he froze in place. His forehead was covered with a cold sweat. He scowled miserably and turned around. There wasn't the slightest bit of his previous aura. "I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving. If you want me to stay here, I definitely won't dare to move." Soon, the courtyard doors opened and the gatekeeper respectfully stepped to the side. Little Meaty stepped out. She looked down at the middle-aged man and sneered. "Your courage isn't small at all. Aren't you afraid of death? The middle-aged man nearly collapsed to the ground. It wasn't that he was crying, but that he was really crying. Tears streamed down his face. I was wrong. Please show mercy. Little Meaty turned and walked away. Roll in here. Her face was filled with anger. If it weren't for little Chinyu, she wouldn't have bothered with him. She would have stretched out a finger and crushed him to death. The middle-aged man hurriedly ran, wiping away his tears as he chased after her. However, he didn't run. Rather, he curled up like a giant meatball. He rolled around in a smooth and natural manner, as if he had practiced this before. The gatekeeper sighed in amazement. Then, he felt admiration in his heart. He thought that this was the highest realm of being a lackey of his generation. As the middle-aged man rolled around, he suddenly became spirited. He turned around and gave the gatekeeper a look that said, "You brat, you know what's good for you." If it weren't for this superb lackey divine art, how could he have lived peacefully to this day? Chapter 1575. After the court adjourned, Chinyu sat in the carriage gifted to him by the Emperor Palace. He couldn't help but look at the tightly shut carriage door. He thought that there wouldn't be another sword chopping down like that, right? That sword seemed to stain the darkness of the night. Although it didn't seem surprising, it was actually terrifying. Its true killing power was likely even greater than the sword that had forced back the middle-aged man and severed his life force. Powerful, but this sword hadn't injured Chinyu at all. He looked down at the cool, white jade in his hand and sighed with emotion. Treasure, what a treasure! No wonder when Meimu had given it to him, she had reminded him to return it to her when he returned. He didn't want to. Really, if it were anyone else who had experienced that sword and held this white jade, they would have the same mentality. But thinking about it, Chinyu felt that it was impossible for him to keep this white jade. Moreover, even if Meimu really gave it to him, he might not dare to take it. Chinyu rubbed his chin and bitterly smiled. He suppressed these thoughts for now. Then, he looked at the object in his other hand. It was a ball that was transparent like water, but had a gelatinous texture. It was soft and pinchable in the hand. But Chinyu didn't believe that it was something that could be casually rubbed around. This was because this transparent water was formed from the fragments of Marquis, Loyal Marshal's seal after Winding River broke apart. This object had no aura, and Chinyu didn't know what use it had. But his intuition told him that he should hold it in his hand. Perhaps it would have some wonderful use, so he did so. Luckily, the Emperor Palace hadn't asked about Winding River's whereabouts. Perhaps in their opinion, after the sword shattered, it dissipated. In truth, this was indeed the case. But at that time, a piece of Marquis Loyal Marshal's seal had shattered. As for Chinyu, he was surrounded by Joss flames that had been cut apart. It just so happened that he had just barely managed to form his own divine kingdom. Invisibly, their auras wove together, resulting in this transparent water in front of him. Perhaps this was what it meant to say that the heavenly Tao was mysterious and unfathomable. The journey was smooth, and they safely arrived at the mansion. It wasn't that the Yi family had put down their obsession with killing, but that Yi Bohu and the great emperor had quietly reached an agreement. For example, in the imperial capital, one could only kill someone once. Since it was unsuccessful, one could only find another way. Otherwise, did they really think that the imperial palace wouldn't dare to completely shed all pretense of cordiality and go all out to annihilate the Empress Yi family? As he stepped off the carriage, the driver respectfully bowed. Chinyu coughed, but his complexion was still a bit uncomfortable. This made the coachman in the imperial palace very nervous. He didn't know why the Marquis didn't like him. The gatekeeper said that there was a guest in the mansion. He looked a little strange, but the main point was that Madame had personally come out to invite him in. When he said, "Please," the gatekeeper's expression was even weirder than when he said, "weird." Chinyu frowned. He didn't have time to bother with the gatekeeper's thoughts. When Yunqing and Little Butterfly came, they had only sent a maid over. But now that it actually personally came to welcome them. With her personality and status, there was definitely something strange about this matter. Who could it be? Chinyu stepped into the Marquis mansion and went straight to the rear residence. Soon he saw the uninvited guest. He wasn't an acquaintance. Chinyu was sure he hadn't seen him before. However, as he looked at him, he could faintly feel that there was something wrong with this person's aura. Moreover, he finally understood why the gatekeeper had said that there was something strange about this guest. Little Meaty was sitting down and drinking tea. He was squatting on the ground and holding his head, cowering like a thief that had been caught red-handed by his master. "What's going on?" Chinyu coughed and sat down next to Little Meaty. Little Meaty coldly sneered. "He's looking for you. Day after day, all this nonsense. My good vacation time is about to be wasted away." Just thinking about it made him feel stifled. His complexion became increasingly ugly. Squatting in a corner, the middle-aged man holding his head glanced over. When he saw Wang Xuanfeng's complexion, he was frightened and his complexion paled. He thought to himself, I'm done for. I, Wang Xianfeng, have experienced many trials and tribulations. I've lived for so many years, and I've seen all sorts of situations. Am I going to die here today? It wasn't that he was as timid as a mouse, but that the feeling Little Meaty gave him was terrifying to an unimaginable degree. Let alone doing anything. He feared he would die with just a single glance. Thus, to Wang Xianfeng, this gloomy complexion was the same as rolling thunder. He didn't know when he would be smashed to pieces by a bolt of lightning. Chinyu looked over. He thought for a moment and asked, "Who are you? Why have you come looking for me?" Wang Xianfeng trembled. He said in a low voice, "I come from the far west. I came here for Grandmaster Prajna. I once mentioned something to you." Chinyu suddenly remembered that before he left the Goliath race, the great shaman of Meng Mountain behind Prajna had used a disciple to ask him about a certain treatment. Could it be this person in front of him? Wang Xianfeng waved his hands again and again. He gulped. It's not me. He thought for a moment and carefully looked around. Chinyu also knew that this matter was extremely important. He looked at Little Meaty and saw that she didn't say anything. He relaxed a little and smiled. It's fine. It's safe here. Humph. Little Meaty coldly sneered. She already owed him a life-saving graciousness before, but now she had to trouble him again. No wonder her nose wasn't her nose and her face wasn't her face. Chinyu lightly coughed. He pretended as if he didn't feel the glare from the side. Wang Xianfeng took out a jade box from his chest. There was a yellow talisman stuck to it. It was unknown whether it was because it had been stored for too long, but the yellow talisman was already charred and black, as if it had been burned by fire. He carefully offered the jade box with both hands. My lord, this is a tuft of hair. May I ask you to take a look? Little Meaty looked at the jade box. She suddenly sneered and stood up to leave. Chinyu revealed an awkward expression. He looked at Wang Xianfeng and said, Wait here. Don't casually walk around. He took the jade box and quickly caught up. As Little Meaty walked away, Chinyu didn't stop. He had an awkward expression on his face. He bitterly smiled, not knowing what to say. Along the way, the maids and servants that they encountered all retreated to the sides. As they saw the madam angrily running away and the marquis carefully following behind her, they couldn't help but click their tongues. In the imperial capital today, the assassination attempt that involved the marquis had caused such an uproar that everyone knew about it. Although they didn't know the significance of this assassination attempt, they could already feel the awe and fear in the eyes of the surrounding mansions. This had never happened before. Even if the marquis had been made a marquis, they would at most be a little envious. It was clear that after this assassination attempt, the marquis' status in the imperial capital was much greater than it was before. But who would have thought that after this marquis returned to his mansion, he would have to follow behind the madam and suffer the wrath of others? The maids all gave up on any hope they had. After returning to her dwelling, Little Meaty's anger still hadn't subsided. She waved everyone away and poured herself a cup of tea, drinking it clean. Chinyu deeply sighed. With the status of the great shaman of Meng Mountain, he wouldn't easily open his mouth. Since he did, it must be a very important matter. So, I really hope that I can help him this time. After all, with my current status, I cannot fake it. He looked at Little Meaty, not waiting for a response. His complexion darkened, and he said with a bleak tone, Of course, if you don't want to, then no matter how slowly he spoke, there would always be a time when he finished speaking, and then he came to an abrupt stop. Little Meaty coldly sneered. Speak. Why aren't you speaking? I haven't heard enough yet. Chinyu turned and sat down. I know that I am in the wrong in this matter. We want in order for you to agree to help me. Little Meaty was so angry that she laughed. Little Chinyu, you are becoming increasingly disrespectful towards me. Do you really think I can't do anything to you? Chinyu said, I don't dare. I'm speaking from the bottom of my heart. As long as you ask, I will do anything I can to satisfy you. After all, our relationship is quite close, right? Who is who? Little Meaty glanced at him. She seemed to regain her composure. She reached out a hand. Give it to me. Chinyu coughed. What? What are you pretending to be stupid for? Return that white jade I gave you today. It's like this. I think that the Yi family definitely won't give up. They might try to play some more tricks. Little Meaty looked at him, a cold sneer on her lips. She had an expression that said if she believed even half a word from him, she would lose. Chinyu forced a smile. No room for discussion? Give it to me. Then he would return it to its rightful owner. A person had to know when to advance and when to retreat. Little Meaty's attitude was so firm. If he continued to pester her, then he would be doing something stupid. Chinyu took it out and offered it with both hands, not forgetting to express his thanks. Little Meaty turned her hand and received the white jade. Her complexion was ugly. You also know how much you owe. Let me tell you, in this world, there is no one who can owe me a debt and not pay it back. Chinyu frowned. You really can't help? The white jade was only joking around. This was the proper business. Little Meaty glanced at the wooden box in his hands. She calmly waved her hand to drive him away. Go, go, go. You're actually finding things for me to do every day. But I have a condition. If you don't agree to it, then even if you break the heavens, I won't help you. After a while, Chinyu frowned and left. As he walked out of the courtyard, he looked back and bitterly smiled. He really couldn't understand why Little Meaty wanted to do this. This request was too bizarre. Shaking his head, Chinyu turned and left. Wang Xianfeng was indeed obedient. She stayed in the living room, her hands wrapped around her head as she squatted in a corner. Chinyu waved his hand. Stand up and talk. Wang Xuanfeng's face lit up with joy. But just as he moved, he seemed to think of something. He squatted back down and whispered, I think it's best if I stay like this. From the looks of it, he was scared to death. It was unknown just what sort of suffering Little Meaty had given him just now. Chinyu was disinclined to speak further. If Wang Xianfeng wanted to squat down, then squat down. He straightforwardly said, I can help you in this matter, but I have a condition. As Wang Xianfeng left the loyal Marshal Marquis mansion, his complexion was deathly pale and his field of vision darkened. He could already see the tragic scene of his head being crushed after he passed on the message. It was truly miserable. Heavens, why does something like this always fall on my head? What did I do wrong? Is it too late to change now? Wang Xianfeng scowled miserably, with a face that seemed as if he couldn't be provoked. He hurriedly left the imperial capital and raced towards the capital region's transmission array. Even though he knew that his fate would be miserable, after he heard Chinyu's reply, he didn't dare to delay at all. Longhorn Alley was one of the tens of millions of ordinary alleys in the imperial capital. As for why it had such a name, that was an unsolved mystery. In any case, the men who lived here didn't feel that they had grown up just because of the name. But there was one thing that was consistent with the name, and that was that Longhorn Alley was indeed quite long. It was a straight line that divided two city squares. Several years ago, a strange family had moved into this alley. Ever since they moved in, they had closed their doors and lived their own lives. Besides the day they moved in, some people had seen that the owner of the house was a sickly and listless woman. The specific impression was vague, but as long as they saw her, they would say that she was a beauty. Her man had a dignified appearance and an extraordinary temperament, like a scholar. This also caused the eyes of the wine shop owner in the alley to brighten. But unfortunately, from then on, no one had seen them again. Whether it was a beauty or a man, many people felt that it was a pity. except for the initial period when the neighbors would talk about it. As time passed, no one cared much about it. After all, life still had to go on. What was done was done. Moreover, there were many strange things in the world of cultivators. As long as things were peaceful and didn't involve themselves, there was no need to meddle in other people's business. Of course, the reason why the residents of Longhorn Alley were so at ease was because they were proper residents of the imperial city. No one would be stupid enough to cause trouble here. The wine shop owner could barely be considered a cultivator. Her realm wasn't high, but she had a way to maintain her youthful appearance. She still looked like a charming woman. She lazily leaned back in her chair. She had long since become accustomed to the hungry gazes around her. It wasn't easy for a woman to earn money. Besides, if she let others look at her, she would lose a few pounds of flesh on her chest. There was a soft creak. It wasn't very loud. In addition, the customers next to her were bragging about yesterday's assassination. It was even more exciting than experiencing it herself. The wine shop owner didn't hear it clearly, but she felt that the sound of the door opening was a little unfamiliar. She was an old resident of Longhorn Alley. She stayed here all day, so she was more sensitive to any changes in the surrounding environment. She turned around. Then, she saw that the courtyard door that no one had entered or left for so many years had actually opened. A woman wearing a veil walked out. Even though her face was covered, she still exuded a sense of beauty. In this world, there was actually such a beauty. The lady boss suddenly felt a deep sense of jealousy. In particular, the few scorching gazes that fell on her had quietly shifted to another place. Gulp! Someone gulped. The woman who walked out raised a hand in front of her, as if she hadn't seen the 9 suns above her head in a long time. At this time, the lady boss's eyes brightened. She had already noticed several unfamiliar faces in the alley. She had seen many things over the years, but she hadn't revealed it before. Could it be that their target was her? But soon, the lady boss revealed a disappointed expression. Although the woman was stopped by several people, the two sides only exchanged a few words. The lady boss lifted a hand and pointed to the courtyard, and those people cupped their hands and drew back. From the looks of it, there seemed to be some respect in his words. The woman turned and walked away. After several steps, she suddenly turned around and looked at the lady boss. She smiled, and it gave people the feeling that 100 flowers bloomed in an instant. Her beauty was indescribable, but for some unknown reason, the lady boss felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over her head. She shivered and lowered her head. Her face was as white as snow, as if she were suffering from serious illness. Chapter 1576. The great river came from the sky and traveled between the colorful clouds. A wutong tree could go up to the sky. This sentence referred to a place in the southwest of West Wilderness that was blessed by the heavens and was rich in spiritual energy. It was called Wudong County. Although it was deep within the Empire's territory, West Wilderness had no room to interfere with its internal affairs. This was because in the early days of the Empire's establishment, Wudong County was in theft and became a fiefdom of a big family. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a country within a country. In the beginning, Wudong County's aristocrats, sects, and even ordinary residents felt extremely uneasy. It was such a simple logic. As the saying went, how could one allow others to sleep soundly beside one's bed? Not to mention, this was not something that could be described with the words beside one's bed. It was like entering the main house and directly barging into the main family's dining table. They stretched out their hand and said that this place belonged to them, but they could not touch the dishes inside. How arrogant, how unreasonable. How could it be good when facing the dignified West Wilderness Empire? Even though the empire had just been established and everything was based on stability, once the overall situation was stabilized, they would definitely turn around and settle accounts. All of this had been proven through countless years of history. Some people tried to move their entire family. Even a rather famous sect decided to abandon the place chosen by their founder and go to Kang County, which was thousands of miles away, to find a way to survive. Wudong County's lord was indifferent to all of this and allowed them to do these little things under their eyes. However, as time passed, the facts later proved that everything was fine in Wudong County. The empire did not have the intention to turn against them. Most importantly, for some unknown reason, the Wutong tree in Wudong County's capital suddenly seemed to have been enlightened and became an immortal spiritual tree that could attract clouds and mist. Moreover, its rank was extremely high. Every day, it could attract the vast spiritual sea above the 9 heavens and condense it into a majestic river that surged into the county. Therefore, an ordinary county city became the best cultivation holy land in the world in the blink of an eye. It was not inferior to some blessed lands and grotto heavens. Along with it, the entire Wutong County's spiritual energy became abundant, causing the surrounding counties to be envious. Those who left wanted to come back, but this time, the Lord of Wudong County was not so easy to talk to. He rejected all of them without exception. There was a certain sect, relying on their own strength was not weak. Their foundation was still deep, tried to do some tricks. In the end, in the county city that occupied half of the city, a sword light shot up to the sky. One day later, the news spread that sect founder's ancestral hall was slashed into two. One of the most powerful supreme elders, many years of bitter cultivation went down the drain, was beaten into a cripple. At that time, the power of the sects was not as weak as it was now. There was a great disturbance, but the capital remained silent. This silence had already expressed their attitude. Wudong County did not care about it, and the specific details could not be investigated. In the end, the matter was left unsettled. Since then, Wudong County had been peaceful, and no one dared to provoke it. The big mansion in the county city was even more so under the Wutong tree, half hidden in the colorful clouds, and became the world's first-class immortal place. Everyone revered it and did not dare to offend it. This was the Li family of Huangzhou. The reason why the two words Huangzhou were added in front of the Li family was because, as everyone knew, in the main branch of the Huangzhou imperial family who inherited the throne, everyone's name had to be crowned with the word Li. Even the current emperor, who sat high above the 9 heavens and wielded great power in the empire, was no exception. Such a Li family. So what if it was a big mansion in half the city? No one had ever felt that it had crossed the line. And today, under the long river of spiritual power, the Li family mansion that was half hidden in the colorful clouds had two true distinguished guests. All of the direct descendants of the family, no matter if it was the elder who was of virtue and prestige and seclusion, or the toddler who had just turned 3 years old, were all summoned into the ancestral hall and respectfully kowtowed to the 2 young men, 1 man and 1 woman, who were sitting on the main seat. Saying they were young was indeed referring to their appearance. The man was dressed in a long robe. His face was like jade. Under his sword-like eyebrows was a pair of brilliant eyes. One could tell with one look that he was not ordinary. The woman beside him was tall and slender, her legs extremely long. Just one look at her was enough to captivate one's soul. There was no coldness or arrogance in her eyes. Instead, there was a faint smile, making people feel close to her. Of course, the appearance of cultivators did not matter their age. There were many old monsters in the world who maintained a youthful appearance. However, many of the people kneeling in the ancestral hall were indeed much older than them. The man was expressionless and calmly accepted it, but the woman's face showed some helplessness. "All right, all of you get up. I haven't even left yet, but all of you are already kneeling on the ground. I feel like I'm getting old." The woman blinked and said with a smile. Everyone in the ancestral hall relaxed, and then a smile appeared on their faces. Their branch of the Li family had taken root in the western wasteland, and although it seemed like they had boundless glory, in reality, leaving the central wasteland divine prefecture was a certain degree of relegation. Facing the people from the main family, they had no confidence at all. Moreover, the 2 people before them were indeed not old, but their seniority was shockingly high. Who told their parents to think of making children after getting bored from cultivating? Of course, This also caused the two of them to be born with shocking talent. Although they hadn't cultivated for long, they had already surpassed countless mediocre people in this world. Well, for example, the people in the ancestral hall. Although their cultivation levels were a bit higher, if they really fought, they would be killed on the spot in just 3 to 5 exchanges. The reason was simple. They came from a good background, cultivated cultivation methods, and had powerful spells. But they also had many treasures. For example, the sword in the man's hand and the seemingly unremarkable white jade hairpin on the woman's head. Just by looking at them a few times, they felt a stabbing pain in their hearts. Tears streamed down their faces, and they could only take this opportunity to appear even more emotional, using old tears as a cover. Thank you, little ancestors. Under the leadership of the ancestors, everyone expressed their thanks in unison. Only then did they respectfully stand up. The sword-wielding man lightly said, "All right, since you've already seen them, those unrelated can leave first. This mess is giving me a headache." His words were blunt, but the Wutong Commandery Leaf family didn't dare to be dissatisfied. They repeatedly nodded and led the juniors out of the ancestral hall. In the end, the only ones left were the current Leaf family head and the 3 ancestors who were in seclusion all year round. As for their cultivation levels, even the weakest one had been a peak sovereign for many years. Li Qinghao respectfully bowed. "Little ancestors, after receiving the Central Desolate main family's orders, we have already mobilized our forces to secretly investigate the Western Desolate." Before the 2 little ancestors arrived, there were indeed several discoveries. But after careful investigation, none of them matched. The sword-wielding man coldly smiled. "You've said so much, but haven't you found anything? If you have these thoughts, you might as well use them to cultivate. That way, you won't be stuck here at such an old age." Li Qinghao was startled. He felt as if his entire body was being seen through. He couldn't help but sweat profusely. The 3 secluded patriarchs of the Li clan looked at Li Qinghao with displeasure and warning. The Central Desolate Divine Prefecture's main family had come. This was their grand lucky chance, and there couldn't be any accidents. The Li family head, who seemed to be in control on the surface, began to sweat even more. His face paled, but his expression was still calm. The woman wearing a white jade hairpin suddenly smiled. "All right, Li Ge, don't bully others. Retract your sword intent." Humph. Li Ge closed his eyes. The invisible sword intent that enveloped Li Qinghao disappeared. He wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and bowed respectfully to the woman. "Thank you, little ancestor Ruhua." Li Ji's mouth twitched. He opened his eyes a little and looked at Li Qinghao, thinking that he had some guts. Li Ruhua smiled brightly. She looked at him and then at the grateful Li Qinghao. "My name was given by my parents. I can't do anything about it. But if I don't like it, I don't like it. Just call me Second Miss from now on." Li Qinghao had already sensed something was wrong. He sweated profusely as he wiped the sweat off his forehead. He nodded repeatedly, but he didn't understand. Ruhua was such a beautiful name, but little ancestor's actions were indeed puzzling. Li Ge suddenly opened his eyes. He coughed lightly. "Let's talk business." Li Ruhua nodded with a smile. The new barbarian emperor was born. I don't know what method he used, but he actually cut off the 13th tower's tracking and hid himself from the world. Since that's the case, it won't be easy to find him. It's normal that Patriarch Qinghao didn't find anything. On the other hand, we have to be careful if we find him. There's a high chance that it's a trap set by the barbarians. Li Qinghao nodded repeatedly. He felt that this little ancestor Ruhua was really considerate. She was a rare kind person in the main family. But he didn't know that he had almost played with fire just now. Although the 13th tower's tracking was concealed, it gave us a rough location. Li Ge waved his sleeves. Threads of sword energy surged out and interweaved into an exquisite map in the air. It was as small as mountains, rivers, and cities. He drew a circle that included a large area to the west of Western Wilderness. "So, I came here with Second Mississippi," Second Misty nodded. "But we can't be sure if it's a deliberate act by the person who concealed the heavenly secrets. So, there are also people rushing over from the north, east, and south. Of course, they aren't people of our Leaf family. An old ancestor of Wudong County's Leaf family slightly frowned. He respectfully said, "Two little ancestors, is this also a test?" Li Ji's face was cold. Of course, whoever finds the new barbarian emperor first will get a chance to enter the 13th tower. Deep in his eyes, there was a burning heat. So, if you can help us find the new barbarian emperor, all your dreams will come true. I can even go back and ask the patriarch to give some of your clansmen a chance to return to the central wilderness. Li Chengtian and the three old ancestors were overjoyed. Two little ancestors, please rest assured. The Leaf family will do our best. The veiled woman who left Longhorn Alley attracted many gazes. Some of them were as hot as fire, as if they wanted to skin her alive. She wasn't angry. When she was in a good mood, she would even turn around and respond with her eyes. So, the others' breathing became heavy and their eyes turned red. Ah! A pained howl suddenly sounded out from a restaurant on the side of the street. The noble young master who was sitting by the window and admiring the beautiful woman raised his hands to cover his eyes. Blood gushed out from his eyes, burning as it came into contact with the air. Crimson flames instantly wrapped around the noble young master. The complexions of the guards beside him changed. But the fire was too fierce, and its might was terrifying. Before they could even respond, the flames were extinguished. A set of white bones, like a smooth and flawless porcelain, fell to the ground with a clatter. "Young master!" The guards roared out, their eyes red. Of course, it wasn't because they saw the beautiful woman, but because once the noble young master died, as his personal guards, they would definitely be implicated. Is it that woman, just now? Catch her! Whoosh, whoosh! With the sound of breaking air, the guards rushed out of the window and landed on the ground. They fiercely looked around, but they couldn't find that woman. She was like a shadow, vanishing without a trace. Meanwhile, on another stone bridge several dozen li away from this street, under the shadow of the bridge, there really was a figure walking out. After it came into contact with light, it rapidly solidified, turning into the veiled woman who was still incomparably beautiful. Chapter 1577. Wherever there was light in the world, there would always be shadows. Even the grand western wasteland imperial capital, known as one of the most prosperous places in the world, still had many dark corners. For example, under this stone bridge, there were many homeless people who were in rags and did not have a home to return to. There were men and women, and there were many of them. The air was filled with a disgusting stench that made one frown. The appearance of the veiled woman was like a cool breeze, instantly attracting countless gazes. The women were envious and jealous. The men were stunned for a moment. Then, after a brief moment of shock, a burning desire and greed began to emerge. His throat bobbed up and down. Suddenly, there was a gulping sound. It was unknown who swallowed a mouthful of saliva, but it was more like a signal. Someone began to stand up. First, he swept his eyes over the surrounding men. Then, with a low laugh, he approached. His clothes were tattered, but they were considered good for this place. The materials seemed good, and his body was tall and strong. His eyes were fierce and fiery. The veiled woman took the initiative to walk forward. The man was stunned for a moment before he grinned. "Little beauty, since you're so sensible, I can let you suffer less. Perhaps I'll even send you out later." He reached forward and grabbed her veil, wanting to see what she looked like under the veil. Smoothly, the man lifted a corner of the veil. He licked his lips and stared with wide eyes. Then he didn't know what he saw, but his tall and strong body suddenly froze. Then, like a wooden stake, he fell to the ground with a loud bang. There was no aura left, and he was completely motionless. He couldn't be more dead. The veiled woman paused for a moment. She looked at the robes on the corpse, and a complex look of sorrow appeared in her eyes. Without pausing, she stepped over the man's corpse and continued to walk deeper into the bridge. This time, no one dared to look at the woman. The natives living here all desperately lowered their heads, afraid that they would make the slightest sound. When she reached the depths of the bridge, the veiled woman stopped. The smell here was even more pungent. Apart from the stench, there was also the lingering smell of decay. 7 or 8 corpses were piled up here. Some had rotted away, and their flesh and bones were half separated. Some had died not long ago, and there were still traces of blood. The woman reached out and pulled down the top 2 corpses. Then, she stared blankly at the corpse that appeared in front of her. Numerous wounds covered every inch of his body, starting from the top of his head down to the bottom of his feet. Not a single spot was left unscathed. Blood had already flowed out of these wounds, causing the exposed flesh to appear extremely pale. The long robe that he was wearing had been stripped away by someone, so it could be seen even more clearly. However, no matter how hard the veiled woman looked at the corpse, she couldn't see the slightest bit of elegance from the past. But she knew very well that the corpse in front of her was him. He had thought that she wouldn't be sad. She had even searched for his corpse to confirm the final outcome. But she discovered that she was wrong. Right now, within her chest, her heart was violently beating, as if it wanted to jump out and slap her a few times. Ask her if she regretted it? Dong, dong. A clear heartbeat could be heard coming from the woman's chest. Her body trembled slightly. Intense heartbeats reverberated under the stone bridge. The people who lived here all had pained expressions on their faces. Their eyes were filled with panic. They struggled to escape, but all of their strength had been sucked out, and they couldn't move at all. Blood overflowed from their orifices. Then, from the pores of their bodies, they turned into blood-soaked people. They maintained the terrified and despairing appearance they had when they were alive. But because they had been sucked dry, all the blood and moisture in their bodies had turned them into withered corpses. Ah! A scream came from the woman's mouth. Flames soared into the skies, wrapping around the stone bridge. The searing heat distorted space, causing the figure of the great fox that appeared to become increasingly blurry. One could only faintly see that behind this great fox, there were tails wantonly waving about, their momentum shocking the heavens. East of the city, Loyal Marquis Mansion. Little Ro suddenly arched an eyebrow. She glanced at a place where flames soared into the skies. 8 tails? No, he's about to advance. He hid himself quite deeply. She looked at it several times. Within her eyes, there seemed to be countless streams of light flowing at an astonishing speed. TSK, TSK, TSK. How pitiful and laughable. Are all the demons so useless now? It was clearly an opportunity to prove one's Tao, but after completing it, they almost went crazy. She raised an eyebrow and curled her lips, full of disdain. However, the taste of the 9 Tails demon cores was also superb, because they had used up all of their secrets and experienced many disasters. They could be said to be all-encompassing. Little Ro was a little tempted, but she quickly sighed and revealed a helpless expression. In her current state, if she fought with the 9 Tails, she would definitely be exposed. At that time, if she was driven back, it would be troublesome to come out again. Endure it, endure it. It's not like I haven't eaten the 9 Tails demon cores before. At most, I'll think of a way to eat a few more in the future to compensate myself. 3, at least 3. This old lady will eat one at a time. Crunch, crunch. Little Ro closed her eyes, hoping that out of sight, out of mind. First, Marquis Zhongwu was assassinated. Then the assassins from Hui Chui Pavilion caused trouble. Now, in the imperial capital, the 9 Tails great demon had descended. Not only did it burn a stone bridge, but it also affected the surrounding areas, turning them into ruins. The casualties were extremely heavy. This was equivalent to holding down the imperial guards and slapping them in the face. It was also a provocation to the West Wasteland Empire. If they couldn't come up with a proper result, it was foreseeable that the entire imperial garrison would have to bear the wrath of the military. But amidst the flames that soared into the skies, the figure of the great fox flickered and then disappeared. No matter how many experts the military searched, No matter how hard they searched, they couldn't find any trace of it. It was as if it had completely disappeared from the world. The Imperial Palace. Above the 9 layers, the Emperor behind the bead curtains had a serious expression. It's the 9 tails. As the Emperor, he was in the Imperial capital and could sense everything. Even though the big fox only appeared for a moment before completely disappearing, he was still able to lock onto its true body. Below, including the sky-bearing king, several officials frowned at the same time. All living beings in the world could cultivate, so there were all kinds of great demons. The Fox clan was one of them. However, the 9 tails was different. It represented the peak of demon cultivation and had great abilities. Because of the restrictions of the world, the strongest demon clans were all in the central wasteland divine continent. It was difficult for them to be born at the borders. In other words, this 9 tails demon fox must have come from the central wasteland. It was unknown when such a great demon had snuck into the imperial capital. Today, the other party had suddenly revealed his true form. Just what was going on? The emperor pondered for a few breaths and suddenly said, "Sky-bearing king, is there any movement in Wutong County recently?" The Li family had enjoyed peace and wealth, but from a long time ago, they had been monitored by the imperial capital. This could be seen as a form of deterrence. The Li family knew about this, but both sides didn't say it out loud, maintaining a certain tacit understanding. The sky-bearing king bowed. "Your Majesty, an urgent message was sent yesterday. All the men of the Li family of Wudong County have gathered in the ancestral hall. Our spies are unable to approach and investigate, but according to information obtained through other channels, 2 little ancestors have arrived in the Li family. If I'm not wrong, they should be people from the Central Wastelands Li family." Behind the bead curtain, the emperor gently tapped the table. The Central Wastelands Li family had arrived in Wudong County, and then the 9 tails demon fox had appeared. Could there be a connection? He suddenly thought of some top-secret information that had been sent to him. Recently, the Central Wasteland Holy Land's 13 towers have been acting up, and the various great clans had also responded. It was just that they hadn't been able to find out what was happening. If he connected all of this together, could it be that they were interfering with each other? Investigate. Find a 9 tails demon fox. No matter where it comes from, it must pay the price for causing trouble in my Western Wasteland's imperial capital. "Yes, Your Majesty." Qin Yu looked at the mass of clear water in his hand, a strange expression on his face. If his senses weren't wrong, this thing was absorbing incense. Now that he focused his mind, he could see the outline of a little person gradually appearing in the clear water. It sat cross-legged, a smile on its face. Although it was extremely blurry, he didn't know if it was an illusion or not, but when Qin Yu looked at the little person, he felt as if the little person was also looking at him. Faint traces of the power of incense poured into the little person, causing it to become increasingly clear. Qin Yu couldn't figure out what was happening. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that he had an incomplete divine kingdom, he wouldn't have been able to sense these things. His eyebrows gradually furrowed together. He looked at the Joss flame little person that appeared in the mass of clear water. Qin Yu didn't know if this was good or bad. If there was a problem he couldn't solve, he could ask Misty. But before he could stand up, a cold laugh echoed in his ears. "If there's a problem, the first thing you think of is me. Little Qin Yu, should I praise you for being smart or for not knowing the difference between life and death?" It was unknown where Misty came from, but she appeared in the room. She lifted a hand and pointed at herself. "I am a great being hidden in space-time. My strength is unfathomably deep, and my boundary is infinitely mysterious. I can descend into the infinite heavens and sign contracts with living beings to complete transactions." Qin Yu glanced at her. "So, are you trying to blow your own trumpet?" With her words cut off, Misty clenched her teeth. "Shut up." She glared at him. Her lips moved, but she didn't say anything else. In truth, she was just a bit worried. During this period of time, she had occupied this little girl's body. When she arrived in this world, she seemed to have been contaminated with karma. But when she focused her divine sense, she couldn't sense anything at all. Although it was impossible for almighty beings to measure themselves, this was the first time she had experienced something like this. Just where did the problem lie? As this thought flashed through her mind, Misty sat down. With a wave of her hand, the mass of clear water in Qin Yu's hand flew into her hand. Although I think you are rather impatient, little Qin Yu, your luck isn't bad. With a lucky chance, you were actually able to raise something like this. Misty squeezed a bit with her fingers. Then, the just flame little person in the mass of clear water seemed to be frightened and emitted a small scream. Shut up. The scream came to an abrupt end. The just flame little person clearly feared Misty. She glanced at Qin Yu, her meaning clear. You aren't as obedient as this little thing. Qin Yu had a calm expression. What is this thing? Misty said, the power of just flames is faith. The divine kingdom you established, it can barely be considered a half-finished product. It is still far from the true just flame great Tao, so it's normal that you don't know this. This little person is called a just flame boy. It is a spirit that is occasionally born in the cultivation of the just flame great Tao. This thing can help the master absorb the power of just flames between the heavens and earth. It is similar to an incarnation that cultivates and can accelerate the absorption of just flames. Qin Yu was keenly aware that while Misty was pretending to be calm, there was a trace of abnormality in her words. Is it very precious? Misty's lips twitched. She honestly nodded. It could be considered precious. Some cultivators that step onto the just flame great Tao are willing to pay a price for it. Of course, not all just flame boys can be sold by others. Once your boundary reaches a certain level, you will naturally learn of this. She looked at Qin Yu and tossed the mass of clear water in her hand. Do you want to make a deal? Hand over this little fellow, and I can consider forgiving you a portion of your previous debt. Qin Yu looked at her, not speaking. Misty coughed. 30%. Qin Yu still didn't speak. Misty clenched her teeth. Half. That is the most I can offer. No matter where you go, it is impossible for anyone to offer a higher price than me. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.